Hello and welcome to Sex Part. Today I'm gonna continue the story What If Deku Had the Ultra Ego Quirk Part 3. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
Smoke still lingered in the hallways as Deku stood before Bakugo, as his whole body shook with both fear and determination as he faced off against his old bully in the UA battle trials. Bakugo only growled with a furious rage as he found this new Deku to be an annoyance. This was clearly not the same Deku he used to wail on when they were children. This was someone else, someone who would stand up to him, someone who wouldn't go down without a fight and challenge his right to be the #1 hero. And that just pissed him off. Bakugo, what's happening? Ida's voice spoke into his ears as the man only growled in the earpiece. Shut up. Just keep guarding the damn thing. I'm going to deal with this little shit stain myself. He growled as he ran at Deku again, trying to make him explode. Uraraka, run. Go on without me. He yelled as he managed to duck under Bakugo's leg kick. I'll take care of this. He ordered as Bakugo was fully focused on the boy, that he didn't notice Uraraka turning and leaving. All he was focused on right now was pulverizing the little nerd in front of him. You can't afford to look away, Deku. He yelled as he swung his hand again, exploding another section of the hull and forming large cracks in the concrete. Yet despite the impending doom towards his life, Izuku's mind was focused on formulating a plan. He knew that he couldn't fight Bakugo forever, nor could he beat him in a straight-up fistfight. Bakugo just had much more experience, skill and time with his own quirk than Midoriya. So, he knew he wouldn't stand a chance in a prolonged fight. But he knew that Iida would have been left alone with the device. So, logically it would make sense to somehow separate himself from Bakugo and follow Uraraka to help her take on Iida and win the trial. Problem was, he knew from long experience that Bakugo would not just let him get past so easily, especially if he was enraged as he was now. So, he needed to buy time for Uraraka, so that she could get away unnoticed. He then ran to the boy as Bakugo grinned at this. Finally decided to fight, now, it's time to show you that my quirk is the strongest. He yelled as he swung his right arm again, only for Izuku to duck under the swing, as the explosion only served to crack another section of the hallway. He growled as he spun around and lighted up his hands full of tiny explosions. He tried to blast him again, but the boy once again evaded his attacks and struck the wall. Small bits of concrete and dust fell from the ceiling as the cracks spread further along the hallway. You're really starting to piss me off, Deku. He yelled as he attacked again, only to miss. The room filling up with smoke and dust that it became harder to see. But Bakugo didn't care, as he merely blew away the dust and glared at the boy that refused to fight back. Izuku, on the other hand, was carefully looking around as he noticed that his plan was almost ready. He just needed to set him off one last time for it to work. Stop dodging me, he yelled as he tried to pin the little shit down. Bakugo's getting angry. This doesn't bode well for Midoriya, a girl with frog-like features stated. Suyu Asui. As she and the others noticed the enraged look in his eyes as he kept blasting while Izuku kept dodging. Tell me about it, but the other guy isn't even using his quirk against him. I mean, we all saw what he could do in the appreciation test. So, why isn't he fighting back or using his quirk? A large boy in a yellow spandex asked as the others just watched Izuku duck and dodge the boy's attack. I don't know, but whatever his reason is, I doubt he's going to last much longer. Especially with the way Mr. Explosions is going on, the boy with a tape-like helmet said, as he and the others watched as Bakugo grew increasingly angry at the boy who kept dodging him. Stop moving around and fight me. You little shit. He yelled as went to grab for the boy's shirt. Small explosions going off in his palm as he was ready to explode killed the little shit. But just as he did, Izuku managed to knock his arm away and almost instinctively from his training with all might, threw his own fist. And punched Bakugo straight in the face. Everything seemed to go silent and still as both Izuku and the control room was bathed in complete silence. Izuku with his eyes wide in shock as he just stared at his fist and Bakugo just still as a statue as a small trickle of red leaked from the boy's nose. That instantly caused Izuku to panic as he now realized how much stronger he was now and how pissed Bakugo was going to be with him. He slowly reached up as he touched the small liquid on his top lip as he brought it up to eyesight. It took a few moments, but he was finally able to recognize what the substance was. Blood, it was blood, his blood. Deku made him bleed his own blood. Soon everything became red to him as he gripped his fists as they shook with rage. Izuku instantly felt a great surge of fear run throughout his entire body as he slowly backed himself away from the boy. Deku, you. The way he said his name sent a chill down his spine as the blonde teen slowly turned to him with red eyes glaring deep into his soul. Smoke and heat began to radiate off his palms as Izuku knew what would happen next, as Bakugo spun around and threw another exploding palm at the boy. You little shit. The explosion rocked the hallway as Deku had no choice but to duck under the attack. The hallway now filled to the brim with smoke and dust, as more bits of rubble and concrete flaked off the walls and ceiling. Izuku had to cough just to get rid of the dust that had entered his lungs, as his eyes stung with small tears from the smoke that lingered in the air. But that was nothing compared to what stood before him as Bakugo had rage burning in his eyes and a terrifying snarl etched upon his face. Izuku had never seen him this angry before. It was honestly something he thought he would never see, no matter how many times Kacchan got angry at him. But then again, he had never fought back against the boy before, let alone punch him in the face. No choice now. He had to fight back. Get up. We're still fighting. Bakugo roared as his palms crackled with small explosions. You're going to fucking pay for what you did. You fuck. It was clear that Kacchan didn't like it, and Izuku could definitely tell that he was going to make good on his threats. I'm going to kill you, Deku, Bakugo roared as he ran at the boy again. And like last time, out of instinct from the many times he trained with all might, he managed to land a punch on the boy's stomach. The air quickly leaving his lungs, as Izuku then made to throw him away. That was until he was harshly grabbed by his right arm, as small wisps of smoke steamed between Bakugo's fingers as the smell burnt flesh and fabric instantly filled Izuku's senses, while Bakugo only grew angrier as pure rage burned in his eyes. Combine that with the heat radiating off his hands, and you could understand why Izuku was scared. Man, that guy's intense, a kid with spiky red hair said as he and the others watched the monitor. Wish we knew what he was saying though. He then blasted the boy straight in the chest as the force of the explosion sent Izuku flying back as he tumbled into the same hall Uraraka ran into. His back hitting the wall with enough force that caused further cracks to splinter across the surface. Izuku coughed as his back ached and his chest felt as if it was on fire. But he quickly felt endurance kicking in, as the pain he felt from Bakugo's attacks instantly flooding around his body and surging towards his fist. No, not yet, I'm not ready, he muttered to himself as he slowly began to stand up. His ears still ringing from the blast, as he could barely make out the sound of footsteps walking slowly towards him. But from the heat and small flashes of light, he knew that Bakugo was walking towards him. Just as I thought. There's no way you could have beaten my score, it was all just dumb luck, that's all. His voice was like that of a demon's to Izuku as he slowly managed to get back on his feet, but had to hold onto the wall to keep himself stable. And now I'm going to prove it once and for all, how useless you are, Deku. He roared as he ran at full speed to the boy. Only at the last minute for Izuku to flood his arm with 1% plus endurance and smashed it into the wall. The shockwave from the strike managed to destabilize the hallway as large sections of the ceiling crashed down between them, effectively cutting off Bakugo from Izuku. He finally managed to catch his breath as he looked at the large amount of rubble that blocked him from Bakugo. That should be thick enough to buy me some time, but if I know Kacchan, this won't hold him for long. I need to find Uraraka. I doubt we have much time left, he said to himself as he quickly ran down the hallway, hoping to make it to Uraraka in time. What's he doing? Why isn't he fighting him? The red-haired boy asked as he watched Izuku run up the stairs towards Uraraka. Wouldn't it be easier if he took out that Bakugo kid first? He knows that there isn't much time left, and he knows he can't be wasting it fighting that boy. The girl with the spiky ponytail and somewhat revealing costume said as she observed the fight. I'm not sure if he planned it, but by blocking off his opponent, he's bought himself more time to assist his teammate. After all, the objective of this test is to retrieve the device, not waste it on petty grudge matches, she said as they all nodded. Very astute, young Yaoyorozu. It is, after all, a hero's job to finish the task and save the day. But sometimes things don't work out as you plan, and unfortunately for our heroes, there isn't much time left. All Might spoke as he looked at the timer that read 3 minutes and 25 seconds left and counting. So, what those two will do now is the main question, he asked himself as they all looked at the monitors. While on the other side of the rubble, a still and silent Bakugo was staring at the rubble as his fist was clenched tight that the sound of leather and flesh echoed in the vacant hall. His mind playing back the last few seconds as this time he noticed the red veins that appeared on Deku's arm as he managed to smash the ceiling down on him. It wasn't like what he saw during that eraser guy's quirk test. It was something else, another aspect of his quirk, but he didn't really care about that. All he cared about was finding that little shit and making him pay for humiliating him like this. Deku. His voice betrayed all sorts of rage and anger as sparks and small pops echoed in the hallway. All restraints were off, and the villain was unleashed. Meanwhile, top floor Uraraka peeked from behind the pillar as she spied Iida across the room as he stood in front of the device. It had been roughly 2 minutes since she and Izuku were forced to split, as he tried to buy her some time to escape from Bakugo. After which she spent the last 2 minutes searching every floor for Iida and the device. Finally, after reaching the top floor, she found him and was prepared to contact Izuku, letting him know her location, and allow the two to team up to win the battle trial. That was until this happened. I see, because Bakugo-san is naturally rotten to the core, he is able to take on the persona of a villain easier than I can. While personally, I find the act appalling, but I understand that this is just another exercise that will help me ascend into the ranks of a hero. He sighed as he placed a hand on his face. If that is the case, then for my role as a hero in the future, I too shall wrap myself in the cloak of darkness. He turned around as he shrouded himself with an evil aura. I am now a villain. Ochako could not help herself as she tried to hold in her laughter, but all that came out was saliva and a muffled laugh. He's so serious. She laughed out loud as Iida then turned to the sound of her voice. I see, so, you've come at last, Uraraka, Iida proclaimed as she flinched, realizing that she just ratted herself out. I had a feeling you would be the one coming here after Bakugo ran off to fight Midoriya. I have no idea the relationship those two have, but it seems to be a particularly bitter one to have caused my teammate to abandon me. But, seeing as I knew you would then be the one to face me, I took the precaution of your arrival and removed anything that wasn't nailed to the floor, he proclaimed as Uraraka gasped as she looked around the room, only to find it spotless. Now you will have nothing to use your quirk on, which means you will run out of time, and evil shall triumph this day. Mwahahahahahahahaha. He cackled with an evil laughter as Ochako and All Might could only stare at him. He's so earnest, they both thought until Uraraka managed to shake her head and focus. I need to focus. Deku-kun is doing everything he can to take on that Bakugo guy, so that means I have to do the same, she told herself as she prepared to fight Tenya for possession of the device. I just need to touch him. Then I can make a run for the device, she thought as she quickly bolted towards the boy with an outstretched hand. However, Iida merely used his engine quirk and easily avoided her as he grabbed her by the back of her costume and threw her across the room, her helmet falling off and rolling across the floor. Normally he would have apologized for harming a girl, but right now his mindset was that of a villain, and he needed to remain focused on the battle. Do you honestly think I would allow you to touch me so easily? I know all about your quirk, and I'm well versed in combating opponents without allowing them to touch me. Iida lectured as Uraraka slowly got up off the floor and glared at him. Iida is taking this way too seriously, but either way, I'm at a disadvantage. He knows about my quirk and has a serious advantage against me with his speed. My best bet is to hold out long enough for Deku to arrive, she thought to herself as she glanced at the boy in front of her. Uraraka. Are you there? A voice suddenly called out from her ear as she instantly recognized the voice as Deku. I managed to separate myself from Kachan and I'm heading to you now. Where are you? He asked as she placed a hand on her earpiece. Deku-kun. I found Iida and you were right, they were on the top floor in the middle room, she explained as she relayed everything to Deku. But I got discovered by Iida-san and I'm up against Iida, she said as the boy nodded on his end. All right, I'm on the 3rd floor now, I should be there soon, hold him off for as long as you can, he said as she strangely found his words comforting and filled her with resolve to keep fighting. All right, see you soon Deku-kun, she said as Iida raised an eyebrow evilly, not that anyone could see, and got into a fighter's stance. I see, so your partner is on his way. He must have found a way to defeat Bakugo. No matter. I just need to protect this device long enough for you to lose. So, prepare yourself. Hero. He roared, menacingly, as Uraraka couldn't help but hold on a laughter at the boy's seriousness and devotion to his role. But that was quickly thrown away as Iida sped towards her, his quirk shooting across the floorway as she just managed to avoid him as he shot past her. The wind from his speed blowing her back as she rolled away from the boy. He then sped again as his engine quirk greatly enhanced his speed as he ran literal circles around the girl. Ochako was lucky this was only a test, otherwise, some of his attacks would have seriously hurt her, but noticed that he had left his post from the device. She decided to use this to her advantage as he used her quirk on herself and jumped towards the device. But just as she was about to touch the thing, Iida sped back and grabbed the device and placed it at the other end of the room. Nice try, hero. I'm surprised to see that you can use your own quirk on yourself, but I won't fall for something like that, he said as Ochako landed on the ground and cursed slightly under her breath. She knew that without anything loose to use her quirk on, she would never be able to get past Iida and retrieve the device. She needed Deku's help, who could at least either distract him or use his strength quirk to create some ammunition for her to use against the speedster. However, she had no idea how long it would take to get up here and how much time they would have left until trial was over. From what she could guess, it wasn't a lot, but still, Uraraka thought to herself as she stood back up. Deku-kun is trying his hardest to win. So, I must do the same, otherwise my plan to help my parents will be wasted. A bright flame sparked in her eyes as she clenched her fists. Determined to win this trial and get the life her parents needed, she then ran towards him as she attempted to grab a hold of him, or at the very least, the device when he avoided her. But like last time, he just grabbed the device and moved it to the other end of the room, completely out of her reach and wasting more of her energy and time. Yet even though she knew it would just be an endless cycle, she had to try and grab him to finish this trial. Uraraka. A voice called out as she and Iida turned to see Deku running towards them. Parts of his costume was singed, and he had long since discarded the plastic face mask after it got destroyed by Bakugo's second explosion. But just seeing him there brought her hope that they could win. Deku-kun. Midoriya, they both shouted as he stood beside Uraraka. Impossible. How did you manage to get past Bakugo? He demanded as Izuku only narrowed his eyes at him. Doesn't matter. Right now, Uraraka and I are here to defeat you, Izuku said as Ochako nodded and both prepared to fight the speed-enhanced boy. Iida glared from his helmet as he began to weigh his odds. It was clear that alone, he could easily have taken on Uraraka by keeping her at bay and away from the device. But now that Midoriya had arrived as well, assuming he managed to take out or incapacitate Bakugo, it meant that it would be harder now to guard the device and keep Uraraka from using her quirk on him. Which meant that he had to be careful now when facing these two, because with Uraraka's zero-gravity quirk and Midoriya's Herculean strength, it was certainly going to be a challenge for the young villain to guard the device. Iida really got into the role of this exercise, huh? Alright, I'll distract him, while you go after the device. I'm not as fast as Iida, but I can at least keep him busy for you, Izuku instructed as Ochako nodded and he made a run to grab the boy with 1% flooding his legs. Meanwhile, Uraraka tried to run after the device. A solid plan but useless as Iida was much faster than Izuku at 1%, as he rushed over and grabbed the boy by the back of his costume and threw him right into Ochako as they both collided in midair. Midoriya at the last minute shifting his body to hit the pillar first and cushion Ochako as they fell to the floor. You'll have to try harder than that, heroes, he yelled with an evil laughter as everyone in the control center could only stare at the boy. He sure takes things seriously, doesn't he? It's no use, Iida's too fast for either of us and I think we're almost out of time, Izuku said as he and Uraraka got up off the floor. But what can we do? If we can't get past him, how are we going to win? She asked as Izuku looked around and surveyed his surroundings. It was clear to him that Iida was faster than both of them, even when he used 1% of One for All. So, unless he was willing to go beyond that and fracture his legs, he needed to think of something else. He could try and combine endurance with One for All again, like he did in the appreciation test, but they had very little time left to properly charge it up. It looked like he was out of options, he had to use more of One for All and damn the risks. Uraraka, when I say so, run for the device. I'll handle Iida, he ordered as she looked at him cautiously, then nodded as she prepared to run for the device. However, that changed when they heard a boot slamming angrily into the ground behind them as they all spun around at the noise. Fear instantly crept down Izuku's spine as saw Bakugo at the doorway. His eyes screaming with blood and rage, while his hands were radiating with heat and anger. Oh boy. The boy with the tape dispensers said as he looked at Bakugo. Short tempers back, he said, as even though he was safe in the bunker, he too felt the same fear that Midoriya was feeling. Even All Might was a little worried about the strange grin that was plastered over his face. Kei-Kachan, Izuku exclaimed as he saw his friend standing at the doorway. Uraraka also had a look of fear as she saw the utter calm rage and hatred that resonated within his red eyes. This was the type of person Deku was friends with? There was no way someone as kind as Izuku could ever have been friends with someone who looked like that. Bakugo. How fortunate you are here. Now we can end these heroes once and for. Iida exclaimed as he was somewhat glad to see his teammate return, but that soon faded as the boy grinned rather unsettlingly at Midoriya. Bakugo? Thought you could get away from me like that, huh Deku? He spoke as his voice resonated with a dark and malicious chuckle, while seemingly ignoring everyone else in the room. Why aren't you using your quirk against me? Or looking down on me or something? He asked, much to the confusion of the others, and then aimed the gauntlet at the boy. You know how my quirk works, don't you Deku? My body secretes a nitroglycerin-like substance, which is then sparked by the sweat on my palms. The more I sweat, the bigger my explosions. Izuku's eyes widened as Bakugo reached for the pin on the gauntlet. A quick glance behind him and he instantly feared for both Ochako and Iida's safety. So, if those eggheads followed the specs I asked for, then I can store large amounts of excess sweat into these bracers and blow you to Kingdom Come. He grinned as All Might's eyes widened at this. Young Bakugo, stop. If you use that on Midoriya, you'll kill him. He yelled into the mic but did little to stop him. Only if I don't hit him head on, he yelled as he pulled the pin. Time seemed to slow down as Izuku watched the small metal pin being removed from the bracer. A small shimmer of light, from what he could only assume was the barrel, told Deku that he had very little time left. His body instantly moved on its own, as he pushed Uraraka out of the way to the left, with barely any time to cross his arms in front of his chest. After the pin was removed, a large explosion slammed into his right side and destroyed anything on the right side of the room. Fire, smoke and the loud crack of sound blasted into everyone's ears as an entire section of the top floor was destroyed. Those underground could feel the shockwave themselves as they all were just shocked at the complete and brutal display of power by Katsuki Bakugo. Uraraka and Iida coughed and gasped for air as thick black smoke slowly drifted out of the large hole that was blasted out of the building. Their ears still ringing from the explosion as their sense slowly returned to them. Ochako coughed and wheezed as she brushed off the small bits of debris and dust that now covered her form. Her eyes instantly traveled to the large hole on the wall as rays of sunlight broke through the smoke. Whoa, she muttered as she looked at the hole. But then a flash of green caught her eye as she instantly remembered that her partner was near the center of that blast. Deku! She screamed as she searched through the smoke for her partner. Her eyes then widened as he stood before her. The right side of his costume was singed with burns as the entire right sleeve of his arm completely destroyed. Small burns were scattered across his right arm and part of his face as he still managed to keep himself standing, despite the damage he took from Bakugo's explosion. It was fortunate that his quirk had built up an endurance from the year of training with All Might. But even that was almost too much for him as he seemed to be standing on his last legs. Deku! Oh my gosh! She cried out as she ran over to him. He stumbled onto his knee as he grasped his right arm in pain as a large burn could be seen on the surface of his skin. Your skin, it's so burnt. She then looked over and glared at Bakugo. What the hell is wrong with you? You could have killed him, she yelled as said boy only clicked his teeth in annoyance. Bakugo, you idiot. Were you trying to kill all of us? Iida managed to cough out as he thanked his luck for the filters in his helmet. You could have killed Midoriya and Uraraka. He scolded as he forgot all about the battle trial and was concerned for the safety of his fellow classmate. The others in the bunker were just as vocal as the kid with the red hair turned to All Might. Sensei, you have to stop this. That Bakugo kid is out of control. he begged as the man only watched the monitors. Normally I would have to disagree, because from what I could hear, Bakugo wasn't actually planning on hitting Midoriya. But if it hadn't been for Midoriya pushing young Uraraka out of the way and young Iida's speed, then they could have been seriously injured in that attack. As a hero, I cannot condone this reckless act, and as a teacher, the safety of my students must come first. I have no choice but to call this match and fail both teams. I'm sorry, young Midoriya. I know how much you wanted to win. He grabbed the mic as he spoke into their earpieces. Young Bakugo, that was extremely reckless and highly dangerous. You could have seriously injured your fellow classmates. Therefore, I have no choice but to disqualify you and... Don't. All Might stopped as everyone on the 5th floor turned to Izuku, his eyes shadowed by his hair as he slowly stood back up. He held onto his right arm while everyone just stared at him. Don't stop the match, he said through small gaps of breath. I can. Keep going. I have to do this. He gripped his right wrist as he looked up and glared into Bakugo's eyes while Ochako could only stare at him. Deku. Ochako whispered as the boy stood up. After all, I said my Deku was going to mean I never give up, and I'm not going back on my word. He yelled out as everyone stared at the sheer determination that burned brightly in his eyes. Ochako could only stare up at the boy as he stood tall and proud, despite the dirt and burns that covered his form. It gave a strange feeling in her chest that she couldn't describe as she just stared at his back. But whatever it was she was feeling, it gave her the strength to stand back up alongside Deku. A second fire burning in her own eyes as she stood beside him. Iida looked at the boy as he too felt an inspirational flame burning inside him, despite being on the opposite side of their battle. It made him see how strong Midoriya's determination and will was compared to his own. He nodded as he got ready to continue. Truly I have underestimated you, Midoriya, he said as he slid back into a fighting stance. Bakugo, on the other hand, seemed to be enraged by this, as his own red eyes glared into the boy's emerald pupils that seemed to blaze like a beacon. And even though they couldn't hear him down in the bunker, the look in his eyes seemed to spark something within the other students as they watched the boy on the monitor. Some found him to be strong, some found it to be manly as hell, and some found it to be inspirational. While All Might could only stare, then smile at his successor, as the boy showed once again that he carried the fire that would one day take his place as the next symbol of peace. Very well, I'll allow this match to continue, but if you try that move again, Bakugo, I will have no choice but to disqualify you and your team, he ordered into the mic as Bakugo merely growled in response and nodded. Fine. Not like I'll needed to beat him, he stated as he clenched his fists and got ready to attack. Oi, 4 eyes. He yelled as Iida flinched at his tone. Don't you fucking dare interfere. Deku is mine, he growled as Iida looked concerned. Are you truly aiming to be a hero? He asked more himself than Bakugo. Meanwhile, Midoriya and Uraraka were slightly unnerved as they were now surrounded by the two villains. The exact situation Izuku was hoping to avoid. He knew that time was running out and that they had maybe less than 2 minutes to complete this task. But they were out of options. Deku, what should we do? She whispered in a hushed tone as the boy in front of her seemed to be weighing the options in front of him. His mind racing to find a solution to the conundrum. His eyes then fell to the floor as All Might also noticed his gaze from the monitor. A smile spread across his face and he gripped his fist. Uraraka, he whispered in a hushed tone. Listen very carefully, because we may only get one shot at this. Here's the plan. He quickly whispered something to the girl. Her eyes widened before they quickly became determined as she nodded. Okay, she said as she turned around and faced Iida, now standing back to back against Deku's, as small veins of red spread across his arm as he looked back up towards Bakugo. Need to go, 2%. He told himself as he focused his mind on One for All at 2% of its power. The familiar fire that All Might would often see in the boy burned brightly while he and Bakugo glared at each other. An angry scowl on his face as smoke began to wisp between his finger, while his eyes screamed of uncontained rage for the nerd that refused to stay down. Time remaining 45 seconds. Bakugo then roared as he ran towards the pair. His palms now glowing from the heat as he runs towards Deku, who slid back slightly into a fighter's stance, ready to meet the boy head-on, as he clenched his right arm. The power of One for All and endurance circulating around his arm, as his eyes remained focused on the boy in front of him. 38 seconds. Here I come. Uraraka! Iida then yelled as he quickly propelled himself towards the girl, as she flinched slightly but then became focused as she prepared her quirk. Her fingertips touching each other as she prepared herself for Deku's plan. 34 seconds, Deku! Bakugo roared as he charged at the boy, his right arm in full swing as Deku then rushed forward with his own arm. That now glowed with the powers of One for All and Endurance. 30 seconds Iida sprinting across the ground before he jumped into a high kick as Uraraka held fast and prepared herself. 28 seconds The mad gleam seemed more intense in Bakugo's eyes, as he and Deku swung their fists at the exact same time. An orange glow and a red light trailing behind their arcs as Bakugo aimed his palm for Deku's head, while Deku's was aimed. 24 seconds, at the floor, 20 seconds, Uraraka, now. The scream was all needed to say as she quickly spun around and touched both herself and Deku with her quirk, right as his fist slammed into the ground. His output of 2%, which combined with Endurance's doubling effect, increased his output to around 4%. The combined strike of 4% plus the damage caused by Bakugo's earlier attack caused the floor to become unstable, as a large spider web fracture quickly spread across the surface, before completely caving in, which caused both Bakugo and Iida to fall to the next level. What? Iida yelled as both he and Bakugo landed on the next floor under them. Iida managing to use his engines to avoid landing roughly, while Bakugo used the explosion he saved for Deku was used to break his fall. But as they landed, they both looked up as their eyes widened to see both Uraraka and Deku floating in midair. 18 seconds. What? Impossible! Iida yelled as he and Bakugo stared up at the pair. Earlier before, Deku had noted that the floor had become structurally weaker after Bakugo's attack, with the only area unaffected was where the device was currently placed. He also took note that Iida was faster than both of them on any solid surface. So, taking a page out of his hand notes on speed-type heroes, he decided the best option was to change the battlefield to their favor. He then formulated a plan that would be risky, but if it worked it would have been worth it. Utilizing his strength and Uraraka's zero-gravity ability, he destroyed the floor beneath them and caused the other two combatants to fall to the next floor. It would only hold them off for a few seconds at least, but that was all the time they needed. 15 seconds, ready? Izuku asked as Uraraka nodded, a slightly strained look on her face as she was not used to making two people float at the same time. 13 seconds He then grabbed her by the arm and spun her around and towards the weapon. Iida and Bakugo instantly realized what they had planned and made an attempt to stop them. Iida using his speed to jump up between the pillars back to the next floor, or what was left of it, while Bakugo used his explosions to propel him towards the pair. 12 seconds, Deku! He yelled as he attempted to attack the helpless boy floating in midair, while Iida tried to go after the rapidly speeding Uraraka headed for the device, which was hard to do, since there was no more floor left for him to land on. 10 seconds But just as Bakugo was about to blast Deku back to the Stone Age, Deku spun around as he focused the power of 2% One for All into his fist and turned to face him. 8 seconds, Uraraka, now! He yelled as the girl instantly cancelled her quirk and the effect it had on their bodies. 6 seconds, release! She yelled as both of them started to plummet back to the earth, Iida's hand reaching at her as he made a desperate attempt to grab the girl, his fingertips just touching the edges of her boot as her eyes widened briefly in panic. 5 Izuku and Bakugo both swung their fists as Deku at the last minute hesitated and shut off One for All, while Bakugo blasted him with his quirk. A large explosion rocketing off as the shockwave was strong enough to push Uraraka closer to the device and Iida further from the girl. But by some miracle, Deku managed to block the attack with his left arm and managed to get a fist in his face, as Deku's above normal strength broke his nose and caused blood to fly out. 4 eyes were wide and hearts were pumping rapidly, as everyone seemed to watch the events in slow motion, time crawling to snail's pace as Uraraka drew closer to the device. 3 Her fingers almost touching the device, as Deku and Bakugo both plummeted to the floor, smoke trailing off Deku's arm, while blood seeped from Bakugo's nose before both of them crashed into the rubble and dust. 2 Iida looking up in shock as the girl then landed on the device and gripped it tight as she shouted at the top of her lungs. 1 Retrieved. The moment she said that, a large buzzer-like noise echoed out throughout the build as everyone stared in shock and awe. Even All Might himself was stunned as he looked at the monitor. His normal smile completely gone as his jaw slacked and his eyes wide in shock. Before the utmost corners of his mouth turned into a grin and yelled into the microphone. Hero Team wins. While back at the trial, Izuku smiled softly as he lay on the ground of the building. His left and right arm were both seriously burnt, and the remains of his costume were singed and blackened. But he didn't care about that as he had finally beaten Kachan at something. Albeit by a risky gamble that could have horribly backfired, but to him, that was more than enough. All the while Bakugo just stared up at the sky, his red eyes wide with shock and dilated, as his entire body felt numb from the realization that he had just lost. To Deku, in the final 45 seconds, as everyone was reeling back, small pieces of rubble and broken glass shattered onto the wreckage that was the villain's hideout. With minimal time left, the Bakugo Katsuki and Ida Tenya villain team was defeated by the hero team, Izuku Midoriya and Ochako Uraraka. Izuku and Uraraka narrowly avoided defeat as a result of their fierce combination of cunning, tenacity, and willpower. Nevertheless, the entire building was judged unsafe for the test and would have to be replaced with a second building next to the existing, indicating that the damage from the battle was still evident. Recovery Girl had to treat Izuku once more, reprimanding him once more for abusing his quirk. Fortunately, endurance prevented him from losing consciousness. Bakugo's nose needed to be manually adjusted, and Ochako had to receive treatment for his motion sickness. The others needed to receive light inquiries, primarily as Recovery Girl's method of correcting him for his careless actions before she uses her quirk to help him heal. All Might turned to face the two teams, and the four of them stood before him. Ida Tenya was startled but slowly grinned as he clutched his heart. All right now, congratulations to the hero team for achieving the first victory. And though many of you shone brightly today, one of you stood out the most. And that person was Ida Tenya, All Might exclaimed. The other students in the class were perplexed because they thought Izuku and Ochako had truly prevailed. A frog-looking girl asked. All Might grinned, but Tenya and Bakugo lost. How come only Tenya is the one that stood out the most? With a raised hand, the girl with the spiky ponytail asked All Might, now, can anyone tell me why I think you Tenya stood out the most? Name: Momo Yaoyorozu Quirk. Creation: the capacity to use her bare body to create any non-living material by manipulating the molecules in her fat cells. She can create anything as long as she understands how it's made. It was because Tenya managed to maintain his goals while adapting to the situation. Bakugo lost control of his own rage during the battle and became fixated on Midoriya in what I can only assume was some kind of personal grudge that had cost him the match. He even went as far as using a dangerous attack that could have potentially caused serious injuries to both the hero team and his own partner. This was a training exercise, after all, not a real battle. The only reason they lost was that of a slow reaction time, she stated with a sense of pride as Bakugo listened to what she had to say. Ochako bowed her head slightly, embarrassed at her own small mistake. Uraraka lost her focus halfway through and exposed herself. Had she remained focused, she could have snuck up on Tenya without alerting him, but lost focus and had to fight him instead. And while I can argue that Midoriya was focused on reuniting with his partner to take down Tenya and complete the object, as well as coming up with a way to separate himself from Bakugo, he too was caught up in the grudge match with Bakugo and suffered the same result. He even continued despite being injured by Bakugo's high explosion when he should have just allowed the match to be cancelled instead of risking further injury. Izuku nodded in agreement with the evaluations of the fight. At this, All Might nodded as well. True, young Yaoyorozu. But do not forget that in a real situation the villain won't give you a chance to stop in the middle of a fight. Sometimes you will have to push through despite the condition of your own body. He mentally grasped his side. All Might nodded to his successor and said, also, her injuries would have been a lot more severe had it not been for Midoriya pushing Uraraka out of the way and shielding her from the blast. Izuku gave a quick smile in response, feeling a little better about his own compliments. Momo also gave a nod. She bowed and said, yes, I understand your point, sensei. Thank you for the insight. All right now, let's get the next match underway. Now the next teams will be B Team and I Team. Bakugo just kept glaring at the ground as All Might's voice faded away. He was totally numb when he heard Hero Team Winning's words following the fight. When he realized he had lost to Deku, The words seemed so wrong to him. Since acquiring his quirk, he had never lost at anything until that point. In particular to Deku. He was unable to comprehend it because, in his opinion, Deku shouldn't have been able to awaken any quirk at all. Still, the proof was right in front of him. He was left feeling a bit bewildered after losing to Deku. The boy narrowed his eyes at All Might, and All Might saw the unusual silence in him. This seems to be the first time in young Bakugo's life that he has ever lost at anything. It appears that he became so accustomed to winning that it was difficult for him to accept the possibility of losing. I've got the impression that he has a very big ego. Which is risky right now because you never know what he'll do later on or what he might do to Midoriya. He looked at the ongoing battle and then at Midoriya. When I get the chance, I need to spend my entire life with him. I'm afraid that boy might do something careless if I don't, and as a teacher, I can't let that happen. Sensei? The frog girl asked, pointing to the monitor as he turned to face her. She questioned, shouldn't you be starting the match now? As All Might winced. Ah, of course. Thank you, young Asui. As each team engaged in conflict with the other, the lesson continued. Sometimes the villains prevailed, and other times the hero team triumphed handily. Midoriya, who had been told he would never have a quirk, took the time to watch the game and analyze every quirk and ability of his classmates. He was able to efficiently list his advantages, disadvantages, and potential counterattacks as a result, in case he ever had to deal with them again, as well as strategies for enhancing their own skills. However, as he was doing that, his subconscious glanced over to Bakugo, who was strangely quiet. If you had known the boy for as long as Izuku had, you would be afraid to. Like himself, he was glued to the matches, taking in every fight as it happened. Especially the guy who won straight out of the freezer by defeating his opponents. Izuku wondered what was going through his mind as he looked at him. He was unaware of the potential consequences of his triumph on the boy who had tormented him since middle school. Would he treat him worse than before, or would he start changing as a result of getting even with him after school? That last one seemed implausible because the boy had a reputation for being extremely obstinate at all times. However, he also started to consider the match itself. True, he prevailed, but only because of one for all and endurance. He thought he had betrayed him. Even with his own powers mixed in, he had used all mights because he believed he could never have defeated him without them. This mentality was ingrained in him during the years he spent at his middle school, where he was ridiculed and ignored by his peers. He should have celebrated the fact that he had defeated his bully and turned his own strength against him, but he was unable to see that it was not All Might's power but rather his own that had prevailed. Ordinary people would have acted in that manner. But this was Izuku, and for some strange reason, in spite of everything he had done to him since preschool, he still considered Bakugo to be a friend, so he wanted to make things right between them. Even if it meant letting his secret out. Everyone started heading to their lockers to change out of their costumes and into their school clothes as the class came to an end. Bakugo remained silent throughout their entire conversation about their matches. However, All Might put a hand on Izuku's shoulder and motioned for him to go before he could. He leaned over the boy and said, "Young Midoriya, may I have a word with you after school?" Then he nodded and went to change, saying, "Meet me in the teacher's lounge, okay?" Once he had changed, he went to the teacher's lounge where he saw All Might, in his Toshinori form, motioning for the boy to take a seat in front of him. Glancing up at the boy, he said, "I know what you're planning to do." Izuku nodded and said, "You want to tell that boy you used my power to beat him, right? And why would that be, young Midoriya?" he inquired. "It's because I need to tell him. I will keep your secret about One for All Might. But I need to tell him that it wasn't my strength. I used your quirk against him and it wasn't right. I still feel like I'm cheating just being here. It's your power and I only had 10 months to learn about my own, while Kachan has." The boy jumped at the unexpected yell from Toshinori, "Shut up, Prince of Nonsense," as the man fixed him with a look. "Now look here, you have got to stop doing this to yourself. You have got to stop thinking that you didn't deserve to win, and you've got to stop thinking that One for All is my power. It was your plan that won the battle, despite me saying that Iida was the standout of the match. Not to mention I observed your fight, you didn't use One for All when you fought Bakugo at all, you used it to break a wall in the floor. That wasn't a fight, that was strategic thinking," he said to the child as he tied his fingers jointly. He sighed and fixed the boy's eyes, saying, "And at the last minute, I saw you shut off one for all before you punched him in the face. That wasn't my power, that was all you. Do you think that I still see it as my master's power? No, I don't. Do you want to know why? It's because my master had faith in me to carry on the power that helped save so many lives. When she passed it on to me, it became my own. When I gave it to you, it became your power." Izuku was staring as his idol spoke. "Sure, you weren't born with it and you're still mastering your own latent quirk, but it is now a part of you. It will always be a part of your life until you hand it down to your own successor. But until that time, I don't get to decide what you do with it, only you get to." Izuku stared at the bandages around his wrist, then glanced down at his hand. He felt nothing of one for all in his fist as he smashed it into the boy's face, only the flesh and bone of Kachan's cheek, the last moments replaying in his mind. All Might was correct. It was him and his own strength that prevailed in that fight, not All Might. Kachan had pushed him down his entire life, telling him to stay in his shadow and work his way up to become the greatest hero. And he felt like he belonged there for a while. Perhaps, though, it was time to get over our fear of Kachan and start resisting. Come out of his shell and establish his own identity. He would never be a hero like All Might otherwise. All he would be is Deku, the same as before, and his name would no longer mean that. He nodded, grinning, and looked up at All Might. He stood up and bowed to his master, saying, "Thank you, All Might. But there is one thing I have to tell Kachan, and I promise it's not about one for all." Feeling proud of the boy, Toshinori watched him go, glad that his words were finally beginning to seep into the gaps in his confidence. Glad I got through to him. That kid has some serious self-confidence issues that need to be worked out. But I know he'll overcome them. He's my successor after all, and I have to have full faith in his decisions." He was enveloped in silence while staring at the clock. He bulked up, grabbed his cape, and hurried down the hallway. But maybe I should just follow and see what has to say. Beyond the UA Academy, walking in silence, Bakugo replayed the events of the day in his mind. He felt that he could now prove to everyone that he was the best around her when he used his quirk in battle, even though it was as the villain team. However, Deku, of all people, defeated him in their first match thanks to a quirk that he was able to conceal from him. Furthermore, he became aware of how different it was from middle school after witnessing how everyone else was fighting. Most notably, the person with the half-and-half hairstyle who put in minimal effort. He had the most potential and the most eye-catching quirk back then, so everyone knew to avoid him. His acceptance into UA was assured. And surpass All Might, the man he looked up to become the world's greatest hero. That being said, today only served to highlight how much below half-and-half he was. Who, without even trying, was able to obtain the weapon and vanquish the villain without hurting his comrade or causing damage to the hideout. Not to mention that he was deeply hurt by what the ponytail girl said about his performance. At the top of the food chain was him. If he ever wanted to be the #1 hero, he had to defeat him now. If not, he would turn into the Deku of the USA. Kachan. Glaring across the courtyard at the boy, Deku said, "Speak of the devil and he shall appear." He turned to face Deku. Breathing in, he stood taller than he had ever seen himself in his life, his breath coming out of his pants. He gulped and said, "Kachan, there is something I have to tell you, something I need to say to you if I ever want to be a hero." As Bakugo blinked at the boy, he confidently said, "I'm not afraid of you anymore. All of my life you've told that I will never have a quirk as cool as yours. That I'll never become a hero like All Might and that I should just give up. You made me feel like less of a human for all of my childhood, and for a while, I even agreed with you, because I didn't have a quirk." He glanced at his hand while staring at the dressing. A sorrowful expression came into his eyes as he remembered all the years he had been bullied. "But then I finally got my quirk, completely out of nowhere, and realized you were wrong about me. You were wrong about me this whole time, and I should have realized that. This quirk I have is different from yours in so many ways, and I'm still learning how to control it. But one day I will master it and I will overcome you with it, so from now on, I will compete with you to become the #1 hero as my rival." Bakugo could see a flicker of doubt in the boy's face, but he still stared at him with utter confidence. It was odd, but he didn't feel happy about it either, or angry at him for that. He was completely bewildered by something novel that he was currently unable to explain. However, Observing this new side of Deku made him realize that if he kept acting in the same manner, Deku would eventually catch up to, if not surpass, him. And he was not going to let that happen in any way. He turned away, biting his tongue. Whatever, just enjoy your win cause it's never going to happen again, damn it. If you're going to stand against me then I'm going to take you down with everyone else. Along with that overconfident half-and-half bastard. You hear me? He turned around as he made his way out. With a final exclamation, he called out to Izuku, who was staring at the retreating boy and slumping, because I'm going to be the #1 hero, damn it. So, bring it on. He reverted back to his previous self for a short while, panicking a little. That was scary. I seriously thought he was going to explode on me again? He asked. However, he dismissed it, turning to face the withdrawing boy he had once regarded as a friend. Even though their relationship may have evolved, they were driven to this day by the same dream. To surpass All Might and become the ultimate hero. He had once believed that as friends, they could pull through. He now realizes, though, that only one of them is capable of being the best. And one day he was going to be that person. All Might, meanwhile, watched the entire exchange from beginning to end and sighed with relief. Initially, he was worried that Midoriya would reveal One for All's secret to Bakugo, but he was taken aback to learn that it was merely a rivalry declaration. It was not a good thing to have between students, particularly since one of them was a real live explosive. However, it served as inspiration for people to challenge themselves and go beyond their comfort zones. If Midoriya was going to be the next symbol of peace, he had a long way to go. It was okay for the time being if his rivalry with his former bully helped him along that path. All he could hope was that nothing untoward would occur. Unbeknownst to them, Ochako, Tsuyu, and Mina had happened to be passing by the glass window and had witnessed the entire exchange. It looked pretty intense, but I couldn't hear what they were saying, Mina said, nodding along with the other two. As Tsuyu observed the boy with green hair, she remarked, Midoriya seems to be looking a little more confident. Ochako observed the exchange and asked, what do you think, Uraraka? She glanced at the two boys, noting the differences between them. Bakugo was noisy and unkind, but Izuku was calm and gentle. From what Izuku had told her on the field yesterday and in the train, she found it difficult to accept that they had ever been friends. She questioned what had transpired to make Bakugo act in such a hostile manner towards someone like Deku. However, it was evident what they had evolved into at this point. Tsuyu raised an eyebrow but nodded in agreement as they watched the boy part ways. I think they have become friends turned rivals. I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing. But I just hope that nothing bad happens, she said. USA the following day. Academy. Apart from the throng of reporters waiting outside the front gate for someone to answer their questions about All Might, the class's second day was surprisingly ordinary as they transitioned from an action-packed training session to classroom instruction. They noticed that the events of yesterday had taken on a different pace, but they also realized that they were still in a school. It was going to be just like any other high school. To select their class president, they held an election. Surprisingly, Izuku received 3 votes despite Iida's suggestion that they cast ballots. Something that made Bakugo angry, while Uraraka casually whistled. Momo Yaoyorozu, who only received 2 votes and was elected vice president, was the only other candidate who received more votes. After that, the day at UA was essentially just another ordinary one, Academy. As he attempted to make sense of the previous 2 hours, Izuku finally managed to breathe a sigh of relief when they eventually found themselves in the lunchroom, under the leadership of the lunch hero, Lunch Rush. Uraraka said, "You okay, Deku? You look a little stressed." Izuku, who is still getting used to talking to girls, smiled nervously. "I'm fine. I'm just a little worried about being class president. I mean, it's a pretty big responsibility. I'm not sure I'm the best person for it." Iida said with assurance and knowledge, "Nonsense. I fully believe that you're the most capable candidate for president, which is why I voted for you after all. You were among those who cast ballots for me, right? You obviously desired to be president, though." Ochako said candidly as she was eating, "He's right, Deku. I think you can be a great president too. But I was certain you wanted to be president, Iida. I mean, you've got the glasses and everything." "It seems like she says whatever comes to mind." Izuku pondered while Iida shook his head. "Even though I aspired to be president, I chose Midoriya because of his unwavering determination and perseverance, which is why I chose you. even though I humbly denied myself the privilege. Izuku blinked at the word, humbly, or rather at the way he said it. Again, Ochako questioned, startling Deku with her direct honesty. Hey, I just noticed but you kind of speak like a rich kid. Are you from some sort of rich family or something? The boy coughed into his hand and nodded. Izuku's eyes widened as he recognized the name. I try not to make it publicly known, but yes, my family is rather wealthy. I'm the second son of a rather well-known hero family and brother to the turbo hero, Ingenium. With Iida unable to look away from the boy, he began rambling on about all the details he knew about Ingenium. Oh, I know that guy. He's the one that employs 65 sidekicks to his firm in Tokyo, and he's also. He said, you are very well informed, as the boy blushed and gave a tense laugh. But yes, he is my brother. In fact, his unwavering adherence to the rules and regulations, plus his leadership skills, is what inspired me to become a hero. But after the entrance exam and the apprehension test, I realized that I'm not ready to lead anyone yet, thus I believe that you are the superior choice for leading our class. Izuku heard the boy compliment his older brother and just stared at him. He grinned to himself, realizing that he shared All Might's perception. Since their heroes had motivated them to become heroes, they both held their idols in high regard. Perhaps they weren't that dissimilar from him. Vree. Every student in the cafeteria looked up as a loud alarm suddenly erupted throughout the building. As all of the older students panicked and started to run to the exit, the intercom announced, "Attention, this is a level 3 security warning. All students are required to evacuate the building in an orderly fashion." Izuku turned around and asked a passing student, Hey, what's level 3? Amidst the flurry of terrified students, one student exclaimed, "Level 3 means someone has infiltrated the building. I've never seen it like that before. We got to get the heck out of here." Before long, the cafeterias were overrun by students who were all scrambling to escape the building. The mass of bodies nearly crushed Izuku, Ochako, and Iida, pushing them in the direction of the windows. Izuku, pressed up against the glass, peered out the window. He exclaimed, "Ow! This is too much," as he and the others began to gradually drift apart. Izuku managed to crane his head to look out the window and saw a mass of reporters standing before the heroes present, Mike and Aizawa. But how could have infiltrated this school? Iida exclaimed. However, judging by the expressions on their faces, they were thinking about ejecting them violently but refrained until the police could arrive. Izuku exclaimed, It's just the reports. They somehow managed to get past the barrier," as Ochako appeared perplexed. How is that even possible? Despite the bodies pressing against him, Iida shook his head in response to her question. "I'm not sure, but we need to reassure the others that there is nothing to be concerned about. Do you have any recommendations, Midoriya?" the boy asked, taking a quick glance around him to assess the situation. He couldn't do anything right now because he was too far away from Uraraka and Iida, but since Uraraka and Iida were closer, he could try to get Uraraka to hover over the other so he could attract their attention. However, he knew from experience that no matter what he did, or could even call out to them, his quiet nature would not be able to draw attention. Which left me with just one choice. Haraku. Get Iida to float. Iida, please pay them some attention and reassure them that everything is well. The two nodded, and he nearly gave an order. Uraraka quickly touched her fingers together, triggering her quirk, and she made the engine boy float. The boy lifted his pants and revealed his exhaust engines, which ignited quickly. He launched himself into the air, aiming for the archway, but his body's lack of weightlessness caused him to spin around and smack right into the center of the exit, barely managing to grab onto the piping above him. Taking a deep breath, he cried out at the top of his lungs, "Everything's all right. It's only the media, nothing to be concerned about." Every student in the cafeteria stopped and listened to the boy's yell, calmly making their way back to the school and slowly scattering. Izuku knew what he had to do as he looked at the boy, who was no longer stuck in the doorway. 1. A classroom before the students of 1A returned to their classrooms following the incident in the cafeteria and the press being led out by the police. Izuku and Momo stood in front of them, prepared to declare who would represent them on the student council. "Before we select the student council representatives, I would like to make an announcement. I don't believe I'd make the best class president," he said. "I think Iida would be the best person," to a stunned audience. He calmed everyone down in the cafeteria when they were pushing for the door. I believe he is the most qualified candidate for it." As he stood up, Iida was taken aback by this and said, "But Midoriya, it was your scheme to have me soothe people. Of course you ought to be president." At that, he shook his head. "Maybe, but I lack the self-assurance to persuade others to follow my instructions. Whereas I would have failed and mumbled, you succeeded in grabbing everyone's attention." As the stern boy nodded and stared at Izuku, some of the others agreed, saying, "You're the best choice, Iida." "Okay. But I don't plan to stay in this role for very long, Midoriya. I'll fill in for you, but once you're comfortable enough to do so, I'll return it to you. Deal?" The boy nodded and shook his hand in response to his question as he held out his hand. "Okay. Whatever, just return to your seats," Aizawa scoffed as everyone flinched and lost awareness of him. And that was the day that Iida was appointed Class 1A's temporary president. Midoriya felt that it was best to leave it in the hands of someone who was qualified for the position until he had the courage to become a beacon like his idol, All Might. But he was confused by the day. How did a group of reporters get past the UA barrier, which is meant to be impenetrable to everyone but teachers and students? Or even those with authorized security passes? The once sturdy iron doors had been reduced to tiny pieces of metal, and the principal and teachers stood outside the school in front of the fully destroyed gateway. "In all my years, I've never seen the gates take a single dent," the principal said. Present Mike remarked, "Hard to believe a bunch of reporters managed to do this, while gathering up a few metal flakes." This was not an isolated incident. Although this was staged, what exactly was the goal? Is this the beginning of something more? As he studied the gates, the small principal remarked, "I have a feeling that this will be our most difficult year yet. All Might, are you up to the challenge?" With a scowl at the gateway and a gut feeling that the principal was right, something was going to happen, the number one hero, in his bulk form, nodded and hoped he would still have the strength to lead Izuku to his dream. Even if it meant that he would die. Izuku stood in front of the spotlessly clean beach, listening to the soft sound of the waves lapping against the sand. He was enjoying the cool breeze and the taste of salt in the wind, his toes wiggling in the sand. He noticed that since starting training with All Might, he had been returning to this beach more frequently than usual, and he felt a soothing sense of calm and serenity entering his body. Coming here, he found, was soothing if he was ever confused or doubted his Quirk's abilities. He held up his hand, looking out to the waves, explaining why he was here. Little red sparks erupted around his hand as he held back his index finger with his thumb and pointed toward the ocean. "All right. Test number 42 to 4% 1 for all in right index finger," he said. The waves splashed somewhat high into the air before splashing back down, and he let out a small shockwave with his finger, saying, "Fire." He let out a grunt, feeling the sting of 4% 1 for all forcing its way into his finger muscle. Though it was painful, he discovered that calling forth a lesser quantity of 1 for all through his fingers as opposed to 100% was much easier and much less painful, albeit with less effect. He shook his hand, noticing the difference in power as he willed the numbness that ran through his digit away. Since he combined his Quirk and 1 for all during the evaluation test, he has recently made the decision to explore his capabilities. He could still recall the weird feeling of the two energies coming together inside of him to increase his ability to do more. However, it was a far cry from what he had shown in the admission tests. He could not have that kind of power. He tried to recall what had happened again, looking down at his hand. Based on the information provided and the footage he saw, he used adrenaline shot to prevent Uraraka from being crushed, only to end up crushed in the process. In an attempt to preserve his life, his body released a flood of adrenaline and engaged the 100% limit of 1 for all. Nevertheless, he had never felt anything like the power he unleashed that day. Sitting in the back seat, he felt as though he was witnessing someone else controlling his body, so he wasn't even positive that it was him. But having witnessed the kind of strength his fight or flight response could summon, he now tried to reach that same degree of strength without succumbing to his Quirk. Then came his fight with Kachan, and his determination to regard him as an opponent fueled the desire within him to keep training and pushing himself closer to his goal. Becoming the hero he had always imagined and surpassing Plus Ultra, as All Might would put it. Positively, he thought the battle had strengthened his hold over 1 for all. The fact that he could now use up to 3 or 4% before exerting himself was evidence of his aptitude. He let out another breath and gestured toward the sea with another finger. The energy of one for all ignited in his finger as he felt his muscles and bones strain. Test number 43 to 5% one for all. Fire. The sand shot up from the blowback and showered him in a tiny wave as another tiny shockwave blasted off his finger. He pointed his other finger at the sea and pulled the trigger, feeling endurance kick in instantly. He let out a little more pain as endurance strengthened his resistance and a slightly bigger shockwave blasted the water. He muttered to himself as he scribbled his analysis in his book. Okay. Note. Test number 43 was enough to activate endurance and doubled its effect to 10%. Need to be more careful. Figures I'd find you here. He turned to see All Might, his teacher's uniform dangling off his bony frame, in his Toshinori form. He covered his mouth and stopped himself, saying, All am I mean, sensei. What are you doing here? He nodded and said to the green-haired inheritor, Relax, young Midoriya. There's no one here. But you don't have to call me All Might all the time, just call me Toshinori. Only when we're alone. He sighed, still feeling the fanboy inside his young protege's words. Yes, Toshinori-sensei. Anyway, what are you doing here, sensei? Shouldn't you be at home or something? I remember reading that you mostly operate from your main office in? Izuku bowed his head pitifully and said, Will you stop listing out my personal life? A splash of blood shot out of his mouth. Izuku nodded and turned to face the beach. I was just passing by when I noticed large splashes of water. I figured it was you, hasn't it? This place has become important to you. He grinned nostalgically as he recalled all the trash that washed up on the beach and the several months he had spent clearing it out. Yeah, I guess it kind of has to me, he said. Toshinori patted the boy on the shoulder and shook his head, saying, When I look here I feel proud. I think it's not something I'm used to feeling, so it's a little odd and I don't know how to feel about it. That sounds silly, doesn't it? He nodded, reflecting on how frequently his old peers mocked his efforts. No, it doesn't. It just means that you are proud of something that you accomplished on your own. From what I understand, you never fully received praise for something you worked hard on, even back at your old school, correct? He asked. Izuku grinned, feeling the support of his idol. But it's different now. You did this on your own with your own power and you feel good about it. It's completely natural to feel that way, he said. He blinked at this as his mentor looked him in the eye and said, But that doesn't mean you get to let it swell your head. From what I gathered, young Bakugo had constant praise from his peers growing up and didn't learn a hint of humility. I don't think it's the parents' fault, but he definitely never learned humility and he became arrogant because of it and nearly lost it when you beat him. Don't let this accomplishment inflate your ego. Let it define you, but don't let it control you. Izuku sighed as he thought of his who was now rival but new. His opinion of his friend had truly changed after his altercation with Bakugo. He was still baffled by what it was that he detested about himself. How could he have made Bakugo hate his guts? There was a gulf between them, regardless of the cause or the actions of his actions. There was a new sense of rivalry between them, and it was just slightly wider now. When Toshinori grinned, he nodded. Good, good, anyway, I couldn't help but notice you're practicing your control with One for All. Care to explain? He asked with a nod. Well, back during the Quirk appreciation test, Aizawa-sensei asked me to pull off something similar to what I did at the entrance exam. When I managed to combine the energy of One for All and endurance temporarily, I noticed that the results were far greater than what I could have done simply using One for All. He searched his purse for a piece of paper. I've been keeping notes on this development since then, and I theorize that I can use more of One for All while endurance is active with only the smallest of percentage. I think it's because my quirk doubles my strength, therefore amplifying the effects of the One for All by a factor of 2 in. As the man wiped the blood from his lip, he stopped muttering, I get it, just stop nerding out. Anyway, I'm glad to see you trying to harness the power of your quirk. It's that kind of drive and devotion that makes you a worthy successor. But you should be careful trying to mix these two quirks together, especially if you're on your own. If you're not careful, you could accidentally activate your other power. His thoughts regressing to the boy's adrenaline mode, while he easily destroyed the enormous zero-pointer. Izuku took out a first aid kit and nodded. I'm well aware of that, sensei. Recovery girl gave me this medical kit and stressed to me not to do anything beyond my limit. Besides, I've noticed that my fingers are getting stronger every time I do this. It's not much, but I should be able to use maybe 10% of one for all in my finger without breaking them by the end of the month. He was gripping his fist and staring at the sea. Toshinori looked at his pupil and grinned softly. With this, I can truly be a hero, like you all might, and save everyone with a smile. Without a doubt, the boy was driven and eager to become a hero. To be able to use his power to save the citizens of this city, however, also made him happy and excited. It brought back many memories of his first encounter with his master years before. All he could hope was that he wouldn't be shoveling the same problems that, at his age, he had to deal with. No, he ought not. That man had passed away. He wished. Izuku nodded and started to pack away his belongings. Well, I won't keep you. Just don't stay up too late. We have the USJ training tomorrow and you need to be at your best. When Toshinori turned back to face him, he stopped and said, also, remember that thing you're doing with your fingers. It might come in handy later. Izuku nodded despite blinking in bewilderment before packing up and leaving the beaches behind. They both failed to realize that tomorrow would test not only their abilities but also their resolve. The following morning, UA Academy. As they got ready for their next lesson, the students of Class 1A were gathered outside the main building. The young heroes learned about the next facet of being a hero today. Saving lives. A crucial component of being a hero was having to develop problem-solving skills in the face of unforeseen circumstances. No matter how big or small, the USJ was able to accommodate all kinds of unforeseen circumstances. As of right now, the class is gathered in front of the main building, with each student dressed in costume. With the exception of Midoriya, whose battle trial outfit Bakugo had destroyed. Rather, he went with his sports uniform, which he complemented with knee and elbow pads as well as white gloves. I guess it's back to basics? He adjusted his gloves and thought to himself. Ochako shook his head. Deku, you're not wearing your costume? Instead, he pointed to his sports uniform and plastic mask covering his mouth and said, nah, got too damaged in the battle trials yesterday so it's getting repaired by the support department. In the meantime, I'm stuck with my PE uniform and I had to buy a new mask for myself. Ochako nodded, remembering her fight with Iida and Bakugo. Her heart raced a little for some reason when she thought back to Deku's unwavering resolve that day and his readiness to give his life once more by pushing her aside to keep her safe. Spending more time with the boy with green hair was gradually causing her to feel something she didn't know was happening. What might that signify? All right everyone. Thank heaven. Tenya's thoughts were interrupted as attention was drawn to the solemn boy. He whistled and gave an order, saying, I've taken the liberty to arrange the seating based on your student ID number. Please line up in an orderly fashion. Iida is accelerating once more, Ochako and Izuku observed. But instead of being a regular school bus, it was quickly discovered to be an open seating bus similar to those used by public transportation. That caused a slight distress for Iida. Damn it, I didn't consider that it was open seating bus. Midoriya could only chuckle at the scene, so Ishido asked, yeah, there wasn't really much point, was there? He noticed everyone else dressed as heroes, and he cast glances around the bus. Truly, he had to respect each and every one of them since they all provided a suitable role to suit their quirks. On the other hand, even though Bakugo destroyed it, his wasn't. It caused him to reflect on his own quirk and how he ought to redesign it in order to better master endurance and one for all. He ought to discuss it with all might following the USJ event. Midoriya, the frog-like girl next to him asked, jolting him out of his reverie. I generally like to say what's on my mind, so please don't take any offense to this. But it's something that's been on my mind. Okay. What is it, Asui? Please call me Suyu, she said, turning to face him. Izuku winced as perspiration started to appear on his brow. Anyway, I noticed that you and All Might's quirks are very similar, aren't they? He said. Whoa. Someone took note. He began to fidget around in a panic. He stumbled and tried to think of something to say. USC, that's not the case. Sure, it's similar. No, I mean. Izuku sighed in relief and thanked whatever force existed for the redhead's intervention, saying, hold up, Suyu. All Might doesn't get hurt whenever he uses his quirk and Midoriya seems to rely on him actually hurting himself to get a power-up. They're already different in that regard. Besides, that type of quirk is pretty cool and manly. It means that you can keep on fighting even if you're beaten to a pulp. You can do a lot of cool stuff with that. He raised his arm as it began to harden. Izuku shook his head, saying, "It's totally different from my quirk, which is useful but pretty boring." Kirishima laughed a little at the compliment, but he continued, "No way, I think your quirk is awesome. You're like a sword and shield at the same time. You can be an awesome hero with that type of quirk. I'm actually a little jealous." He grinned at Midoriya and said, "Thanks, man, you're pretty cool. But to be a pro you need a quirk that is both powerful and flashy. My naval laser is the perfect combination of power and style. It is magnifique," Aoyama said with a grin. He blanched and gave the pink girl a slight glare. "But it doesn't help if you blow out your stomach, does it?" he asked. Bakugo just scoffed and turned his head away as Kirishima said, "If you want to talk about flashy quirks, then I guess it would be Bakugo and Todoroki. They have awesome quirks that will make them pro heroes in no time." He wasn't too concerned because he had already experienced people complimenting him on his quirk while he was in middle school, and it seemed that this would continue at UA. Alternatively, he believed Tsuyu said, even though he has a powerful quirk, his personality isn't that great, so he'll never really be that popular. Bakugo almost exploded, and Izuku flinched in shock. Pun intended. "What did you say, frog face? I'll kick your ass. See what I mean?" Bakugo turned to face the boy, scowling. "You know we've only known you for a short time and already we know your personality is like flaming garbage," Kaminari smirked. "Say that again, you blonde-haired moron, and I'll blast you to the fucking moon." Izuku found it hard to believe and could only stare in complete bewilderment. "I find it hard to believe that Kachan is the target of bullying. UA is really perplexing." When you consider it, he couldn't have understood, of course. Bakugo had dedicated his entire life to discrediting Izuku's aspirations to become a hero. He was quirkless, so break him of his spirit and turn everyone around him against the green-haired boy. If individuals like Midoriya could be made fun of for something over which he had no control, then that said something very important about the kind of society they lived in. However, the roles had now reversed. Izuku was accepted by his peers, but Bakugo was being teased because of his personality. "High school, is that correct?" The bus pulled up to a large domed building, and Aizawa's tired voice said, "All right, pipe down back there, we're here." When they entered the expansive complex, which was made up of several locations including lakes, mountains, and even deep ocean waters, everyone gawked in amazement. As they gathered at the entrance, the majority of students exclaimed, "Holy crap! Is this Universal Studio Japan or something?" The students turned to face the owner, and a synthesized female voice said, "It has flood zones, landslide zones, and inferno zones. Each one built to simulate certain events that can and will happen in the world, whether they be natural or created by a villain. Every disaster and accident you can imagine, I built it all here in this facility." It was discovered that the owner was a massive space suit design wearing a pair of yellow boots, a black helmet with white eyes, and what appeared to be a puffy jacket rather than an actual suit. Despite the costume, no one could tell from the voice if the speaker was a man or a woman. However, Ochako and Izuku recognized the individual as 13 right away. Call sign: Space Hero 13 Quirk. Black hole. This feature, as its name suggests, enables 13 to produce black holes that absorb and break down matter at the atomic level. 13 mostly uses this quirk to break up debris and rubble during a rescue operation. Thus, 13 is an expert in rescue operations. 13 exclaimed, "That's why I call it the unforeseen simulation joint," to the students. So, it's similar to Universal Studios Japan. Not even Izuku was as giddy about 13 as Uraraka was. It seems that as a child, 13 was her favorite superhero. It was probably because 13 shared her quirk of being able to control gravity and other space-related phenomena. Nevertheless, it was comforting to know that there was a classmate who shared his enthusiasm for heroes. It was pleasant, though perhaps not as much as with him. The space hero held up 3 fingers and said, "13, where's All Might? The roster says he's supposed to be here supervising today," Aizawa asked. Aizawa sighed wearily and shook his head. It appears that he has reached his limit during his morning commute and is resting in the teacher's lounge. So, he won't be in for a while. They turned to face Aizawa, who said, "The height of irrationality. All right everyone, let's get started." While everyone else stared, 13 continued, But before we do, there are a couple things I need to say. Or 3. Or 4. That is quite a bit. As many of you know, my quirk is called Black Hole. It gives me the ability to suck up anything in front of me and break it down on an atomic level. I have used this ability to save the lives of many people. However, everyone listened more closely as 13 was serious. My quirk, while has easily saved many lives, it can also end many lives. No doubt there are many among you who can do the same. Everyone gave a nod, with some even valuing their individual quirks. Izuku, particularly after witnessing the power All Might possessed, power that was now his. In our world, the use of a quirk is strictly monitored and restricted for the safety of others. It may seem like a stable system, but we must never forget that all it can take is one wrong move with someone's uncontrollable quirk to kill people. 13 spoke with a serious tone while many of the others nodded. Izuku turned to Uraraka and wondered how many lives she could save with her quirk. During Aizawa's test, you learned of the potential your quirk has. With All Might, you learned how your quirk can pose a danger to others. In this test, you will be taught to use your quirk in a way that saves lives. Many of you will find this easier with some quirks. And others will find it more difficult. Izuku turned to face Bakugo, who was listening to 13's words based on the boy's expressionless face. 13 bowed as the class applauded and applauded him. But rest assured that this class will give you a new perspective in using your quirk. In doing this, I hope that it will give you the strength to become great heroes. That is all. I thank you for listening. Aizawa observed the show with a sly smile hidden under his bandages. He stopped as he sensed a disturbance in the air, saying, "All right, that's enough of that, now it's time to." There was a slight but discernible change in the wind as he turned to face the USJ courtyard. A tiny purple hole started to show up in the world's fabric and grew bigger and bigger until a hand managed to grab the portal's edge. A boy with a hand on his face and blood-red eyes that cried out for helplessness emerged. As Aizawa turned to face the students, his senses went into overdrive. He yelled, "Everyone huddle up and get back," as everyone momentarily became confused. The portal widened and widened until several people emerged. All of them, big and small, skinny and plump, were in front of the 1A class. Kirishima questioned, "What's going on? Are they more robots?" Aizawa shook his head in response. His eyes grew wide with fear. "No, those are villains. True villains. This is not part of the test," he cried. He pulled down his goggles and tugged at his cloth, giving the order, 13, protect the students. With two yellow eyes fluttering in the dark purple folds of its misty form, the portal slowly began to surge and took on the appearance of a semi-physical person. Eraserhead and 13, according to the schedule, All Might should be here. At this, Aizawa's eyes narrowed. "I see, so they were responsible for the break-in yesterday. Makes sense." As he observed the heroes and their pupils, the villain leader, the one with the hands on his body, lifted his head. He turned to face the gathered students, many of whom were beginning to feel afraid. "Where is he? We came all this way for All Might and he's not here. And we brought so many playmates for him," he said. The young man with blue hair said, his voice sending shivers down their spines, "I wonder if he'll appear. If we kill some of his students." Mineta let out a terrified cry. What? Those are real villains." Kaminari questioned, "What kind of dumbass would try and break into UA of all places?" As Momo, the spiky ponytail girl, worriedly turned to face 13. 13 nodded and surveyed the school, asking, "Sensei, how did they get in? Isn't this school surrounded by specialized intruder sensors?" "Yes, of course. But why haven't they gone off?" Shoto Todoroki, the boy with the mixed race hair, peered around, surveying the group of villains. He narrowed his eyes and assessed the situation, thinking, they might not have really triggered the sensors because one of them has a unique quirk. Either that or they have some way of jamming the sensors. Not only that they came to this location that is far from the campus and the teachers as well as when there would be fewer people here. This isn't random, it's a coordinated attack. 13 begin the evacuation. One of these villains might be jamming the sensors. Someone with an electric-type quirk perhaps? Get outside and get help. See if Kaminari can use his quirk to contact the school. I'll hold them off," he said as he opened the cloth. Aizawa smirked under his bandages as Izuku worriedly said, "But Aizawa-sensei, there are too many of them to take on by yourself. Your speciality is quirk erasing and capture, there's. As the villains grinned, he ran down the stairs, saying, "Realize, I'm not a one-trick pony." One of the bad guys yelled, "Ranged unit open fire," as every other villain with a gun or other ranged weapon pointed them at Aizawa. However, as many of them appeared perplexed, nothing occurred. Only to have Aizawa wrap them in his cloth and strike their heads together, knocking them out. One of them, a four-armed rock man, smirked under his mask and charged at the teacher, saying, "You idiots! That's Eraserhead. He can erase quirks just by looking at you." He charged at Aizawa, roaring, "Is that so? Think you can erase a heteromorphic quirk like mine?" But was struck in the face. As he dodged and outwitted the other villains, he said coolly, "Of course not." He ducked under a fist, wrapped his cloth around his leg, and yanked. "My quirk only allows me to erase operative and transformative quirks, and seeing as you guys like to get up close, it would make things difficult." Putting the villain with the four arms in a different group. The blue-haired boy and the Mist Man watched from a distance, and the Mist Man growled angrily, "But that doesn't mean I can't counter them." The blue-haired boy moaned in frustration, as if he had encountered something bothersome. Not good. He is very well versed in hand-to-hand combat, and those goggles make it impossible to track whose quirk he's erasing. Not even the mob we brought is enough for him. He looked up, spying on the group of students at the entrance, and said, "I hate pro-heroes. These bunch of idiots are no match for them, and we don't have a lot of time." He had a crazy expression in his eyes as he spied on the students. "Kurogiri, go and spread them out among the facility. We can't have them escaping and calling for more help. If the schedule is right, then All Might will eventually turn up, but until then, it's not possible for them to alert the teachers just yet," Kurogiri said, nodding before disappearing. As 13 was escorting the students back to their quarters, a purple mist materialized in front of them. He spoke as he blocked off their escape, saying, not so fast." Kurogiri spread himself around the classroom as Izuku and the others stood back, saying, "We can't you all calling for help just yet." He stood up quicker than I could stop him. Damn it. Of all of them, this one is most likely the most dangerous. When Aizawa noticed the man vanish and then reappear behind the class, he cursed. 13 stood in front of the students, shielding them, and said, "Who are you and what do you want?" A head that looked like it was on fire materialized in the mist, forming two eyes. His eyes narrowed and he glared at them all. "We are the League of Villains, and we have come here with only one goal in mind. To end the life of the symbol of peace, All Might." An image of All Might materialized before Izuku's eyes widened and then vanished. His body started to spread out among the students. "We were under the impression that he would be here today. But it looks like things aren't going according to plan. Oh well, my role still remains the same." 13 turning on Black Hole by opening a port. However, Bakugo and Kirishima suddenly materialized in front of Kurogiri and attacked before anyone could take action. Kirishima swung at the mist, hoping to hit something, but Bakugo struck it first, causing a massive explosion to blast off at impact. Standing in front of the students with Bakugo, Kirishima yelled, "As if we're going to let you attack us." 13 shouted, "No, get back," as the mist started to reappear. "I understand why you guys were admitted to UA," he said, as the mist surrounded the students and his eyes reformed. "That was close." Immediately the mist surrounded the students, saying, "Which is why I'm going to have to spread you out among the facility. Can't have you getting in our way." Shoji held onto Siro and Mina and gripped the ground to keep them in place, while Iida quickly grabbed Ochako and Sato as he pulled them out of the mist. But then Izuku felt his body shift, and then the feeling of falling overtook him, and he found himself above the shipwreck zone. The rest was sucked away. He cried out, "Crap," as he plunged into the water. Fortunately, it wasn't too high, or he might have seriously injured himself. He rapidly started swimming back to the surface after snapping out of his daze, all the while trying to figure out what the hell had just happened. He must have teleported the others somewhere, so he must have a warping quirk. What does it mean that they intend to kill All Might, though? As he swam to the surface, he thought to himself, what the heck is going on? I have to warn the teachers and get back to the others. They must be aware of what is going on. But before he could get to the surface, he noticed something shining, and when he turned to see an amphibious-looking man swimming toward him, he flinched in shock. How absurd is that? He managed to say, "Nothing personal, kid, but you're going to die now, while submerged," and then he opened his mouth to show off his incredibly sharp teeth. "Say goodbye, Ga," he exclaimed before being struck in the face by frog-like feet. If he hadn't been submerged, Izuku would have gasped in shock upon seeing Tsuyu Asui's serene face with Mineta nestled beneath her arm. Tsuyu yelled, "Midoriya," before shooting her tongue and encircling his chest with it. Then, sending the villain farther into the pool, she took off, shooting Mineta, Izuku, and herself to the surface. She chuckled and said, "Goodbye," before breaking off. As Izuku coughed up some water and gasped for air, she carefully placed him on a ship's deck. He managed to say, "That was close. But I'm alive," as he peered over the railing to see Asui submerged in the water. "Thanks to her," he said, squinting his eyes as the boy with the purple ball of hair spoke, rubbing his head against her chest. Before he could say anything more, she slammed him against the ship's deck. Though, to be honest, not challenging enough. What in the world was said to her by him? As she ascended the side, he asked himself this question. She turned and gave him a blank expression as she said, "Thanks for saving us, Asui. I told you to call me Tsuyu. Call name. Tsuyu Asui." She is a frog with the ability to do anything. Quite apparent and self-explanatory. When he remembered, he winced and stammered out an apology. He nodded and she said, "It's okay for now, but just remember it next time, okay, Kiro?" The other villains started to surface as they peered into the water, saying, "Besides, we have bigger problems to deal with." As the villains surrounded the ship, Mineta screamed in terror, "Ah! More villains. Why are there so many villains?" Mineta freaked out, and Tsuyu surmised, "They must have been waiting for us in the water." He cried out, "But why are they all here?" as Izuku squinted at all the bad guys in the water. "That mist guy said they're here to kill All Might. It must have been them that caused the media to break in the other day. They must have gotten a hold of the schedule because they knew All Might was supposed to be with us today. It's like Todoroki said, this is a coordinated attack. They knew we'd be here and have prepared for it well. But because he wasn't, and they changed up their plans." Mineta questioned, his voice trembling a little, "But it's not like they can actually kill All Might, right?" "Yeah, he's too strong for that. As soon as he gets here he's going to 1-2 and knock them out." Mineta started to tremble once more, and Tsuyu said, "But think about it, Mineta. If they decided to attack here, then that means they must have figured out a way to kill him. Otherwise, why else would they come here?" Izuku started muttering to himself and looked away. Is it possible? Could they actually have found a way to kill All Might? But why? Because he's the symbol of peace? Because he fights against evil and makes the world a better place? No, there has to be a reason behind it. But what? What reason is there to kill All Might? He stopped to consider their justification. He started to think of All Might and asked himself, reason? Pictures of him destroying bad guys with a single blow. Pictures of him in his real form encouraging him to become a hero and thanking him for his efforts. Their reason? He shook his head, balling his fist. Their motivation is irrelevant, he said. Look, as Tsuyu and Mineta turned to face him. Whatever their reason is for being here doesn't matter. What matters right now is getting out of here alive and regrouping with the others. I doubt they are going to make it easy on us or any other our classmates. And even if they have a way to beat All Might, right now isn't the time to worry about that. He raised his voice and examined the United States of America. Right now, his friends were starting fights in several places. Standing side by side, they got ready to confront the villains who had come to their door. Everybody prepared to defend their own lives. Right now, we just have to endure it and fight for our lives. On that day, the 1A students were made aware of the daily threat that the heroes had to deal with. They would be introduced to the world of heroes and villains, as well as the numerous hardships they would encounter in the years to come. At this point, I hope they would have the fortitude to bear it. Mineta just stared in disbelief at Izuku's blatant statement. He was hearing things that he couldn't believe. Did he really want to take these guys to war? Could it be that he genuinely desired to battle those who professed to possess the ability to eliminate All Might? How could he have known? He cried, "Why, you can't be serious," and cast a disbelieving glance at the boy with green hair. Izuku shook his head as he shrieked in terror. "Are you seriously suggesting we fight these guys? We're just kids and this is our first days of high school. We should just bunker down and wait for the pro heroes to show up." From this point, I don't think we have much of a choice. Sooner or later these guys are going to stop waiting around and attack us. And from the looks of it, they are well suited for aquatic battles. We can't afford to stay here much longer, so like it or not we have to fight back. Midoriya said with a bit of apprehension in his own tone. He wouldn't be the last to acknowledge his fear. In fact, this would be the first time he had truly had to fight for his life. With both of his quirks, no less, aside from the slime villain a year earlier. Not only that, but in far worse circumstances, they were most likely attacking their own classmates. They had to act quickly because they couldn't afford to wait. With her typical passive expression, she said calmly, "He's right, Mineta. These guys have no intention of laying us live, and without the aid of Pro Hero we have to fight back. Probably a part of being half frog." The idea of a fight only made Mineta tremble with fear. He looked to Asui and said, "Still, there's something that's been bugging me since we got here." "They sent you here, Asui. I mean Suyu," he corrected quickly. "It's okay, take your time saying my name." "Alright, thank you. Anyhow, wouldn't it have made more sense to send you somewhere that wasn't to your advantage if they were really planning on fighting us?" Suyu nodded, appearing to cheer up at this point, at least he thought so. They were staring at a big dome-shaped building with flames painted on the side when she said, "You're right. If they knew about my quirk, then they should have sent me over to the fire zone over there. In a hotter environment, I don't perform that well because of my frog physiology. Maybe the reason they sent you here is that they don't know about our quirks? I think they're hoping to overwhelm us with large numbers rather than with clever tactics. It would explain why there's so many of them, instead of specific individuals that could potentially counter our abilities. It seems like they just gathered people for a specific zone and tossed them in here. If that is the case, then right now these guys don't know what we can do, and that gives us an advantage." He stated this with an analytical perspective and a brave expression. He turned to face the villains as they swam around the boat, saying, "That means we have the advantage of surprise and will allow us to exploit it." Suyu nodded as they bowed down and out of sight. "So, I think right now we should take stock of our abilities and try to think of a way out of this. I'll go first. You can probably guess already, but my quirk gives me similar abilities to that of a frog. I can stick to most surfaces and my tongue can stretch out to 20 meters. I can also eject my stomach to clean it, but it's gross so that's not helpful, and I can secrete a poisonous fluid. It's not actually poisonous, but it does sting a bit." Mineta flushed as his thoughts wandered to unsavory places. Secrete. Izuku glanced at the purple boy's swollen face, sort of disgusted, and then focused again. "My quirk is a two-parter quirk, I guess. I can increase my strength to superhuman levels, and I can also absorb physical damage from powerful blows and convert the energy into my fists at twice the power. Afterwards, my body builds up an endurance to that level of pain for the next time. But I'm still learning to control my quirk, and if I go over my limit, I will break my bones. At the moment my limit is 3 to 4%, maybe even 5 if I push it," he said, taking care not to disclose the truth about One for All. Mineta gave him a quick pop, and then dropped the ball onto the wall. "My quirk is called Pop-Off. Basically, I pull these little balls off my head and stick them to anything, depending on how I'm feeling. If I take too many of them my head will start to bleed, and they don't stick to me. It's kind of like the 'I am rubber, you are glue' saying." The two teenagers looked at the boy for a moment, then a few tears welled up. "Wah, don't look at me like that, I know my quirk is totally useless." Before a sudden and powerful wave blasted the side of the boat, Izuku tried to explain. No, that's not it. I think it's a great quirk. We just need to find a way to use it in this situation." The villains in the water smiled at the sinking boat as he yelled, "Shit. They're done waiting." When he threw his pop-off balls into the water at random, Mineta freaked out and became terrified. Izuku saw that the villains were avoiding the balls, and at first he was going to tell him to stop worrying. As the boat began to gently lower itself into the water, he took off his glove and a thought began to form in his mind. He cried out, "Wah, we're all going to die," as Suyu gave him a cool stare. "Mineta, are you sure you came to UA to become a hero?" "Shut up. It's perfectly normal to be scared like this. You're the weird one for not being scared. We only just started high school a couple of months ago, for crying out loud. I never expected to be thrown into a life or death situation so soon." There are so many things I wanted to do before I died. I never even got to grope Yaoyorozu's boobs. Why are you here at all? The creation user shivered somewhere in the mountain zone, suddenly craving a purple grape punch for when she got home. But lost her cool as she, Kyoka, and Kaminari defeated some evildoers. Izuku stood close to the railing's edge, staring out at the water. As Tsuyu and Mineta gazed at him, he said, "The moment when a villain believes they are victorious is the moment when you take your chance." All Might had said as much in a previous interview. This is our only chance if we want to get out of here. Mineta questioned, Midoriya, what are you? But stopped when he saw the determined expression in his eyes, even though his body trembled. Tsuyu nodded and grabbed the small purple boy, who could only stare at him in amazement. Everyone, I have a plan, but I'm going to need your help. Tsuyu, when I give the signal, jump. Mineta, when I do, throw as many balls as you can into the water, don't stop no matter what, he said to them. He jumped into the air, screamed at the top of his lungs, flooded his legs with 2% of one for all, and stood on the edge of the railing. As the boy started to fall toward the water, he soared above the villains who just stared at him and thought he was a moron. But what they missed were the tiny mutters that came out of the boy's lips and the red glow that began to encircle his finger. Asterisk. They have us completely surrounded and there's too many of them to hit with a big smash and I can't sacrifice my whole arm. But if I take into account of the water and what I did at the beach and during the test. His thoughts went back to the big waves he could make with a simple finger flick, and then to the time he threw the ball in Aizawa's Quirk apprehension test, filling his digit to the brim with 100% and aiming for the water. So, if I can't hit all of them, then I just need to hit the water. He screamed at the top of his lungs, Delaware. As the power of one for all surged in his finger. Smash! His finger sent out a powerful shockwave that crashed into the water. The villains screamed in shock as the shockwave struck, carving a sizable hole in the water. And let physics do the rest. Thanks to endurance, his right finger and thumb were red, but not nearly as much as when he had first forced 100% into his finger. As the water abruptly separated, the villains were forcefully pulled into the sudden vacuum and the water began to draw in everything around it. He exclaimed, Tsuyu, Mineta, now. Just as Tsuyu leapt and used her tongue to grab hold of the boy. Mineta let out a scream as he removed several balls from his head, yelling something about how angry he was at Izuku for being so awesome. That made no difference though, because the balls stuck to the villains when they were pulled into the water, causing a massive geyser to erupt and launch the bundled criminals skyward. Mineta. Midoriya! Exclaimed Tsuyu as they flew through the sky. She said, quite simply, you guys are pretty cool. As they accomplished the first zone. Izuku, barely containing his pride at their victory, held his hand. The first zone was cleared by them. They surfaced quickly, all three of them splashing down as they plodded through the water at a slow pace. Izuku sighed with relief as he turned to face the boat and watched it sink to the bottom of the lake. He exclaimed, we made it, upon spotting the joined villains drifting in the water. Mineta nodded and he asked, is that going to hold them? Mineta boastfully remarked, I took a really good poop this morning, they're not going anywhere, while Tsuyu pulled him by his cape. She turned to face Izuku and said, please don't talk like that, it's gross. Tsuyu asked, that was a close one, huh Midoriya? But paused when the boy began to mutter. That was a really risky gamble. There was no telling how many more of them, but they didn't seem that smart, otherwise they would have some guys in reserve at the bottom of the lake. But I guess they weren't thinking ahead. I am a little worried that they might drown being stuck together like that. Some of them might have less full aquatic quirks and might need to come up for air. But it looked like some of them had special gear which might last until the pros get here, but I can't be sure of that and they're villains so. She snapped him out of his reverie, saying, Midoriya, stop that, it's creepy. He started, but stopped when they realized there was no way to sneak around while the fighting was still going on. Sorry about that. Anyway, it looks like we landed not too far from the plaza. We should continue along the shoreline until we get to the exit. Tsuyu observed as they watched the man battle, but it looks like Aizawa-sensei has drawn all the villains in the plaza towards him. He's trying to keep them away from the others. Mineta looked scared as he snapped his head at Izuku, but Izuku said, he's holding his own, but there's too many of them. Even for someone like him. Izuku shook his head and he hissed, Midoriya, You're not seriously suggesting we fight them? He nodded at them, and Izuku turned to face the USJ. No, I'm not saying we jump into the fight. They have us outnumbered and we just get in his way. All I'm saying is we wait for an opening and run to the exit. If we can lighten Sensei's load, then we'll try. But for now, we need to stay put and not get in his way. I just hope everyone else is doing all right. In the meantime, the landslide zone, one of the villains managed to utter, what the hell? As he and everyone else around him froze like ice sculptures. Is this really a kid? Shoto Todoroki exclaimed before they stood him, appearing unimpressed. Todoroki walked over to the nearest villain and mused. I thought that because there was so many of you that you would be elite or something. But really you guys are nothing but thugs with quirks. He stood before the villain, ice still streaming off his right side. Now, that mist guy said you are all here to kill All Might. But I highly doubt sending a bunch of morons like you is enough to take him down. More than likely you were meant for us, which means only a few of you may actually be the dangerous ones. That means you lot have some sort of plan. He got up and looked at them. The villains all looked at each other as they struggled to escape, saying, so, here's the deal. Tell me what you're planning, and I'll unfreeze you before you get frostbite. I'm trying to become a hero after all, so I can't let that happen. Now, do we have a deal? However, they could feel their limbs freezing and were paralyzed. Oh okay, we'll tell you, he said as Todoroki listened, and they reluctantly nodded. Toru jumped up and down, and a bubbly voice with some floating gloves said, wow, that was awesome, Todoroki. You took down all these villains by yourself. You were even careful not to hit me. No wonder you're so cool. When Todoroki heard her voice, he cringed inside, realizing that one of his classmates had come to help him blast the area with ice. Oh my god, I almost froze her too. I better not tell her that. Zone of collapse. As Bakugo battled his way past the villains, loud explosions and screams could be heard throughout the collapsed zone. He was joined by Kirishima, the red hair hardening user, as they were dropped into the collapsed zone and attacked by villains. However, the villains were totally unprepared for Bakugo and Kirishima's explosive and resilient combination. The two gathered the vanquished villains and arranged them on the ground, surrounding them. Kirishima said, okay, that's the last of them, letting go of the final one. He exclaimed, you've got some pretty good moves there, you're awesome. While Bakugo just made note of how unimpressive they were. Anyway, we should probably go and help the others. If we got dropped off here, then that means everyone else is still in the USJ, right? I'm a little worried about the rest of our friends that don't have means to fight back. And it was our fault for getting in 13's way when we charged in like that. As men, we have to take responsibility for our actions in. Bakugo cut him off as Kirishima stared in shock, saying, you can go if you want, but I'm going to go take out that portal prick. What? You're seriously going to keep fighting that guy? Besides, you saw that guy, none of our attacks could hit him. A villain yelled as he leapt towards Bakugo, knife ready to stab him in the back. Shut up, I know that. But I figure that guy is their ride. We take him out, then these guys are stuck here for the pros, and I wouldn't go after him if I didn't have a way to beat him. Besides. Only to have it seized in midair and, with a loud boom, slammed into the earth. Bakugo said calmly, if these are the only people they sent after us, then the others should be fine, and Kirishima blinked. Wow, that was really cool and collected of you. Usually you're like. The version continued to yell, and he had a mental picture of Bakugo getting angry. Perish. 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 I'm always calm and rational, you damn broomhead. Ah. There he is. Kirishima's skin hardened and he smiled, TCH, whatever, I'm going after him. You can come if you want, I don't care. Bakugo nodded as the two headed toward the plaza, saying, all right, you convinced me, man, I'm coming too. As men have to stick together after all. Re-entering the courtyard, a large back creature held down their teacher, his arm bent at strange and unsettling angles as blood slowly spread around him, leaving Izuku, Tsuyu, and Mineta staring in complete horror. They had just recently been able to witness their teacher keep taking out the villains one by one. When the fight began to shift from their side to the villains, they appeared to have the upper hand when they heard a scream emanating from the top of the stairs. It appears that 13 was hurt, and Aizawa made it to the kids with the blue hair in order to defeat the boss. However, The child had anticipated his quirk and seized his arm, slowly shattering it. Fortunately, he was able to escape him, but the big, black monster the child named Nomu, the bioengineered anti-symbol of peace, quickly overtook him. Even for an expert, canceling out quirks is a pretty cool ability, the leader remarked as Nomu pinned Aizawa. He laughed mockingly as Nomu kept snapping his right arm, saying, "But against overwhelming power, you might as well be quirkless." The beast crushed Aizawa's arm like a twig as he struggled. He attempted to erase its quirk, his eyes flashing red, but Nomu simply slammed down his palm and crushed his other arm, making him cry out in agony. This guy. Does he appear to have deleted his quirk somewhere? However, he has incredible strength. That implies this man is just as strong as All Might on a fundamental level. His head cracked and splintered as Nomu grabbed it and slammed it into the ground. They broke the pro-hero to pieces, and all Midoriya and the others could do was watch in horror. Mineta hissed, "This is bad Midoriya," as he shook in terror. He shook and said, "We need to get out of here," as Tsuyu continued to hide in the water. All Izuku could do was watch in numbness as the bad guys overcame their sensei. His body shook from fear and rage, wanting only to put an end to their violence. But with his level of control, he knew he had no chance against these guys. He was limited to watching. Kurogiri materialized in front of them through a dark portal. "Tamura Shigaraki, we have a problem. 13 is incapacitated, but one of the students managed to get by me. He's won his way to alert the others, we're out of time." The man, who is now known as Tamura, gave Kurogiri a long look before beginning to scratch at his own neck. He was scratching more and more, his lips releasing little groans. Oh, Kurogiri. If you weren't our only means of escape, I'd turn you into dust. We can't take on a dozen pro-heroes, even with Nomu. It's game over, man. Game over, for now at least. His shoulders slackened almost dejectedly. With hope soaring in Mineta, he said, "We're leaving." He threw himself onto Tsuyu, tears streaming down his face. Did you guys hear that? They're leaving," he exclaimed. "Isn't that great?" The little pervert latched onto her chest and said, "Yeah, but..." Before she grabbed his head and submerged him, she casually said, "I don't like this Midoriya," as she submerged Mineta. He cautiously glanced at the group, sensing something wasn't quite right. Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. Why would they go to all this trouble and then just leave? Is it because All Might didn't show or because we managed to get a warning out to the teachers? He asked. Tamura snapped his fingers abruptly. "Oh, but before we leave," he said, disappearing for a split second in front of Tsuyu. "Let's break the symbol of pieces, pride a little?" Izuku couldn't keep up with how quickly he moved, and before he knew it, he was directly in front of Tsuyu. The same integrating effects that had injured Aizawa's arm were replayed in his mind as Tsuyu took his place and she gradually turned to ash. She was frozen in place, waiting for the worst, just like everyone else. However, Shigaraki just stared in confusion for a moment before laughing. "You truly are amazing, Eraserhead." He turned away as Aizawa succeeded in raising his head long enough to exploit his peculiarity on the man and rescue the frog girl. Even so, he was aware that he could do nothing to prevent the Nomu from hitting his head on the ground. However, it took Izuku only that instant to come to his senses, as he immediately conjured up everything he owned with One for All and hurled it directly in his direction. He slammed his fist, sending a huge shockwave flying outward and scattering dust everywhere as he yelled, "Get away from her!" Smash! Izuku experienced no pain or broken bones in his right arm for a brief period of time. "My arms are intact. Was it something I was able to control at the last minute?" But Nomu towered over them, shattering his hope. With a harmless fist against the monster's stomach, he felt as though it was grinning at him. "That was a nice punch, and you called out smash right before you hit him. Are you an All Might fan?" Shigaraki questioned, just as Nomu grasped the green-haired boy's arm tightly, causing Izuku to groan in agony. "Oh my! How absurd! He has such a firm grip." His eyes widened in fear as a fleeting memory of his conversation with Tsuyu flashed through his mind. Oh no! Not at all, on him. It was ineffective. Tsuyu must have been referring to this. This is the weapon designed to destroy All Might. Shigaraki smiled deviously behind his hand. Time seemed to slow down as he gave the order, "Whatever, deal with them, Nomu." Izuku's thoughts were racing as he witnessed the beast charge at him, realized that this Shigaraki guy was going to attack Tsuyu once more, and even witnessed her attempt to assist both Mineta and him. However, Izuku's top concern was preventing Shigaraki from murdering his classmates. He realized that while he couldn't stop this Nomu guy from attacking him, he could still assist Mineta and Tsuyu in escaping. Izuku charged everything he had into his finger, including the pain from Nomu's hold, and pointed his endurance and one for all finger toward the water. A big shockwave snapped and blasted the water between Tsuyu, Mineta, and Shigaraki with a mere flick of his finger. Shigaraki was forced to tumble away as the blast pushed the two away from the handman. He heard them yell, "Midoriya," before giving them a determined glare and making sure they understood. As they landed deep in the water, he cried out, "Asui, Mineta, get out of here." Tsuyu turned to face Mineta and reluctantly turned away, but he could see the hesitation in her eyes. With her quirk, their forms dive under and swiftly escape. Shigaraki shook the dirt from his hair and grunted. He turned to face Midoriya, who was being held by Nomu, and said, "Two of them got away, what a pain." Izuku gasped and grunted as the beast gripped his arm, "But at least we got one of them, playing the hero of all things." "Oh well, one dead kid is as good as any, do it." In a different version of events, All Might would have broken through the doors to save the students in Class 1A. He would have dispatched the villains and reduced the Nomu to a pulp. But there was a small delay in this timeline. All Might had just started to head for the USJ and was still in the teacher's lounge in this timeline. He would not arrive in time to witness the Nomu's impending treatment of his young protege in this alternate reality. If Izuku had an extra month to master One for All, in that hypothetical world, was also the universe where the top hero would arrive 10 minutes late. The stone shattered and cracked as the beast slammed the boy to the ground. His bones shook from the blow, and blood spurted from his mouth. The effects of endurance kicked in immediately, but the pain was beyond anything he could have imagined. The energy wavered uncontrollably before dissipating. The beast swung him again, slamming him into the ground until his vision went completely white from the impact. The boy cried out in pain, and a huge crack that looked like a spider web opened up. A fist slammed into his chest just as he was about to give another cry, forcing all the air out of his body and causing a metallic taste to rush out of his mouth. Warm blood seeped from his mouth, and he felt his body gradually going numb, only to see the smiling form of Nomu standing over him. He could feel that at least a few of his ribs were broken, and there was no doubt that he had fractures and a very noticeable dislocation in his right arm. That punch would have killed the young hero training if it weren't for his quirk, which made his body slightly stronger than it was before. It did not, however, lessen the searing pain that was now coursing through his body, the worst of which was felt in his bones and chest. The Nomu roared and stood triumphantly over the boy. Many other people in the vicinity were drawn to this noise as the villains smiled at the gory scene. The terrified teenagers stared in horror at their fellow student's blood-stained form, and a certain gravity girl stared numbly at her friend's broken and defeated body. The leader of these villains, however, grinned maniacally behind his hand as he relished the fact that all hope of them escaping alive vanished from their eyes. Game over. The next event was best described as an emerald and crimson lightning flash. Not sure alone, cold, scared, confused, and weightless. Izuku experienced these sensations while floating through the peculiar darkness. His eyes opened slowly to discover that a strange dark mist covered his entire body, revealing only his upper face. All he felt was nothing, and he cast his gaze around at the emptiness. Before he could ask any more questions, 8 pairs of glowing eyes emerged from the shadows and surrounded him. He was surrounded by a plethora of colors as red lightning erupted and roared with a loud clap. He felt as though every cell in his body was on fire after being struck by the red spark. He felt a surge of energy flow through his body, and the eyes around him glowed brighter than usual. He thought for a split second that he heard voices saying, "Do not be alarmed. Everything will work out fine. As you are not by yourself." The lightning surged around his body, green and red, and his white, pupilless eyes snapped open. The Nomu was launched across the field with such force that it barely had time to register what had happened before a loud, thunderous clap reverberated throughout the USJ. Everyone was knocked back by a strong gust of wind, and then the scene was covered in dust. Crashed into the side of the building from across the field. The enormous creature known as Nomu was groaning and gasping in agony as it lay against a gap in the wall that resembled a large spider and had a large fist embedded in its stomach. As everyone in the field stared at the downed form of the giant beast, silence descended upon them all. The monster that had previously terrified the students above the stairwell and the villains had slack jaws and wide eyes as it moaned in agony across the room. Shigaraki and Kurogiri watched in disbelief as the beast staggered back to its feet. As everyone turned to face the center of the cloud of smoke, he saw a bright glow and exclaimed, What the hell? What the hell happened to my Nomu? When he saw the once down wannabe hero standing in front of the gathered crowd, his eyes grew wide. His skin had a radiant quality, resembling the red and green lightning sparks that surrounded his body. His hair had started to stand up and grow more spiky, with tiny patches of green and red hair and yellow energy sparks coming from his pupil-less eyes. Ochako was faced with a sight all too familiar as she gazed at the glowing figure of Izuku Midoriya. Deku. Shigaraki's fingers twitched as he glared at the boy. Now that the fist-shaped mark on its stomach had vanished, the beast staggered forward, saying, What the hell is this? Is this some kind of hack? You can't have a second life. That's cheating. Nomu. Kill him. Nomu let out a roar and accelerated toward Midoriya at breakneck speed. It wasn't until the boy had vanished that he noticed the slender trace of an afterimage. The best of them were sent flying before the Nomu could even begin to process what had happened. It then readied itself once more. The Nomu puked blood as Midoriya reappeared in front of it and slammed another fist into its stomach, sending a burst of red energy shooting in all directions from its body. Midoriya continued to speed past the beast, nearly appearing as a blur of crimson emerald lightning, a massive shockwave forming with each hit. Aizawa watched his student move like a blur, barely opening one eye. Midoriya. Tamura cried, What the hell? How the hell is he hurting Nomu? As Nomu crashed into the earth. Kurogiri, watching as the beast staggered back and attempted to locate the boy, only to have him move faster than the best could track, analyzed, It looks as though that boy is able to bypass his shock absorption and land solid blows against Nomu. No, it's more like he is shooting concentrated physical energy into Nomu that affect his inner workings. I think it's almost like getting shot with buckshot. The shock absorption can't handle concentrated hits of power. Tamura let out a growl. Kurogiri nodded and got ready to teleport the hero away, saying, Then get him away from Nomu. We can't risk this kid managing to stop our anti-all might. However, as the wind pushed the mist back, a huge shockwave blasted into them. Tamura growled at this, feeling his fingers twitch. He's creating too much wind. I can't get close enough to portal him away. The other students, looking up at the stairway, stared in a mixture of fear and awe at how completely different the shy boy with emerald hair was acting. Honta Shiro and the others were watching Izuku seemingly overpower the beast when he exclaimed, Whoa! What the hell is up with Midoriya? He's like a freaking beast at the moment. It's quite different from when he versed Bakugo, Shoji said, hardly able to keep his many legs on track as the boy raced by. It was more difficult to track because of the massive shockwaves that were released by the impacts. Large and muscular, Sato exclaimed, Who cares? We may actually get out of this one, with a hint of relief. Ochako, however, was more concerned than anything and lacked enthusiasm. She could still clearly recall that version of Deku from the exam months prior, as well as the events that followed. The unconsciousness, the broken limbs. When this mode stopped, she was afraid of what would happen to him, and if he would be able to stand again. Turning around, they saw Mineta and Tsuyu running in their direction and exclaimed, Everyone! Aizawa was carried, barely conscious, as they staggered toward the staircase. At the top of the stairs, Ochako cried out, Tsuyu, Sensei, you're okay. Mineta remarked, I'm fine too, you know? As Shiro began bandaging his wounds with tape after they had placed Aizawa down. Tsuyu turned to face the courtyard while Izuku Midoriya, a blur of crimson and emerald, kept attacking the beast. Tsuyu inquired, What happened to Midoriya? While Ochako shook her head. I don't know, we all saw that beast attack Deku and then, Nomu exclaimed in rage before being crushed beneath the ground. A shockwave erupted around them. One for all sparking around his leg before he kicked the Nomu in the face and sent the beast reeling back, saying, He turned into that. That's Midoriya? Mineta questioned, his voice trembling just a little bit. With a trace of jealousy in his voice, Mineta exclaimed, "Damn him. Why does he have to be so cool?" Suyu turned to face Ochako, but, as Ochako nodded and the group returned to the fight, she questioned, "Something like that can't come without a price, can it?" The monster spit blood and fangs, and Izuku punched his fist into its mouth. Nomu let out a roar of pained rage, but it was quickly kicked in the head, whirling around in the air and almost hitting the roof before tumbling back to the ground. With the energy swirling around his fist, the empowered Izuku reared back his fist. "Detroit," Izuku uttered as the creature got closer to his swinging fist, a voice that seemed to be a combination of several others' voices. Smash! A loud crack of thunderous impact was heard as Nomu launched himself backward, skidding across the floor and colliding with the building's side. Massive fissures extended from the force, powerful gusts of wind that almost knocked everyone off their feet. Everyone looked on in wide eyes as the smoke cleared and the area filled with dust. Nomu's face had a large fist-shaped mark that appeared to be imprinted into the wall. Tamura's fingers twitched and his wide eyes clenched into fists in fury. His entire body shook and he started scratching his neck, saying, This isn't fair." He yelled angrily, "Why, you cheated? You used a last-minute item and boosted your stats. This can't be happening." The other villains were hanging their mouths and had wide eyes. "Tamura," he said, turning to face the portal man as he spun around. Tamura was about to argue, but he turned to face the boy as his body slowly stopped glowing and his limbs looked like mashed purple messes. "We should retreat now. The teachers will be here any minute." Izuku's limbs were all purple and slanted as he fell to the ground. He had obviously passed out from the pain shooting through his body, his eyes closed. As he just about regained consciousness, a tiny moan came out of his mouth. He lay flat on the ground, his body hurting and his vision going blurry. Ochako cried out in terror, "Deku-kun!" just as Sato and Shiro were about to rush to save him. Up until a slight rumble that made everyone turn around and their eyes enlarge with a mixture of fear and excitement. "No way!" Mineta trembled, and Tamura smiled. Nomu slowly but painfully pulled itself away from the wall, and fragments of its shattered body started to snap back into place. "Not just yet," it said. Nomu snapped its body back into position, saying, "It looks like our boss still has some HP left." It stumbled slowly in the direction of the green-haired child, who could only glare as the beast's shadow grew larger and larger. Nomu reached down and took the boy by the head, dangling him in his enormous hand. "I have to admit, for a lonely NPC, you had me worried there for a minute." Tamura approached the boy and said, "But happily it seems you were still no match for Nomu's shock absorption or his regeneration abilities." "S shock absorption and R regeneration?" he moaned, his jaw snapping back into place in time with the beat. The students cried out in terror as they kept pushing back the villains who kept coming at them from above. "I would have liked to see how the rest of this plays out." Blood was still dripping from his mouth when the beast clamped its hand over Midoriya's head, causing him to gasp in agony as his skull was gradually crushed. "But sadly," he said, "it's game over." Whack! Whoa! The USJ doors blew off their hinges, bringing everything to a stop and covering the area in a thin layer of dust. Confusion gave way to relief. Endearing smiles on the faces of the would-be heroes, and fear among the villains who dared to hurt them. As they passed the beaming faces, All Might's angry face materialized in front of them, and they all let out a loud cry to the world. Many cheered, "All Might!" with a mixture of fear and joy as they all fixed their gaze on the number one hero, who was smiling for the first time in a long time. No, this was one of those rare occasions when the hero, who usually entered the scene grinning, instead had a look of pure rage on his face. Especially after witnessing his successor's mutilated body entwined in the beast's jaws. Tamura bellowed, "Ah! The main boss has appeared," while All Might gave the group of villains a fierce look. Izuku moaned, peeping an eye out from between its clutches. All Might. As he stepped forward, he glared at the beast holding Izuku in particular. "I was on my way to meet with you all when I ran into young Ida in the hallway and he told me what was happening," he said, looking around to the relieved and sobbing faces. "Have no fear, why? I am so sorry, young ones, for making you worry." He ripped off, reaching for his tie, "For I am here."
I will continue the story in next part. Till then, bye bye.